Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Oh yes, we were just talking off air for a little bit there, but we inevitably brought up the eclipse, and Silas had mentioned he was going to attempt to view it in the cloudy skies of Ireland. So just sort of quizzing on the sort of relevance of the eclipse and how we feel it, plays out, what it really means.
To me, I think we were mentioning as well how it may affect the behaviour of people, not just the viewer, but the very aeon or age in which we reside within. And of course, the Aleph Tav eclipse may tie into, and I've got some notes on this. I'm writing them as we speak right now, so I will do a video on it. But they're pretty lengthy, and it seems that it relates to this idea of the retrograde movement into what people would term the age of Aquarius, from Pisces to Aquarius. And interestingly, just for example, right? So I was mentioning just off air, just the sort of numerical, the interest in numerical information regarding these eclipses, right? So the entire ecliptic event began in 2017 on October the 21st with the Great American Eclipse, and it shall end on April 8th, 2024. Now, between those two dates, there are roughly three, one could say four, major ecliptic events over the continental United States, which, of course, its terminus point of April 8th, 2024, will form the Aleph and the Tav, right? Primarily the Aleph. So again,
And
this
what are
idea of, well, the Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, or the Pan-Semitic alphabet, and the Tav, or the X, in Paleo-Hebrew, or the Paleo-Hebraic script, is our equivalent of the Z, or the Greek equivalent of the Omega, right? The ending letter. And so the beginning and the end, the Aleph and the Tav. So the X, the Tav, was formed first. That was formed, I believe, with the last eclipse in 2023. I think it was the Texas Ring of Fire through Corpus Christi and such, or the body of Christ, interestingly. That's another thing with these eclipses, where they pass through in their points of intersection, meaning, in terms of the Aleph and the Tav and that, they pass through some seriously strange place names. So you have Corpus Christi there. For example, the one on April 8th, 2024, its intersection point will be in a place called Little Egypt, Illinois, or what was once called that, or it's commonly referred to. A little town called Manakenda, I believe is the pronunciation of it, and that had the epithet, or the motto, of, in the early 20th century, of the Star of Egypt. And what is the Star of Egypt? It is Sopdet, or as we would know it in the West, is Sirius, right? So it's all very interesting. But between the dates of August 21st, 2017 to April 8th, 2024, that is a period of 6 years, 6 months, 6 days. 6 years, 6 months, 6 weeks, and 6 days, right? So you've got that sort of full house, if you will, of sixes. Obviously, that relates to itself, the sort of eschatology found in the Book of Revelation, and also to the world of carbon and the material world. So, yeah, I think this idea of the Aleph and Tav eclipse, it links to the ending of the age, right? the ending of the empire of the US as well, the beginning of the end, and it also correlates
Sure.
with this concept of the Great Reset too.
So then,
You know,
tying it to the US thing, where does that come in?
well, it's interesting as well because this Aleph and Tav eclipse, just the Tav, so this cross of eclipses that occur consecutively within 10, in a time period of 10 years or less, that has only ever occurred. Excuse me, the last time that occurred was 1492. I believe it was 9 days after Columbus, quote, quote, discovered the United States, pardon me, the Americas. So, I mean, interestingly, 9 is linked to the Fool or Orion. It's the number of primary stars within that constellation. It's also a circular number. So 3, 6, and 9, everything will always return back to 9 or 3 or 6. I mean, for example, if you take the circle, 360 degrees, of course, we all know that. 3 plus 6, you take the individual digits of those degrees, those numbers, you will get to 9. If you half 360, obviously 180, you'll get to 9. Keep halving it and add the individual digits up, you'll get to 9. It's just it's a circular number. It's the number of heaven, right? The 3, 6, and 9. Those are the numbers of heaven. So yeah, I think it will have an effect on the psychology of people going into this new age through this transition, because again, like I mentioned, if I can remember it, what I stated off air, if you think of, a river, right? Every drop within that river, all of that which forms together in a coalescence that forms the stream, there's an imperceptible force which acts upon that stream, those individual droplets which are agglomerate to form the stream. It acts upon it, the current, right, the driving force which leads it out into the sea, and then in turn leads it into other river systems, and so on and so forth. Again, the circularity of it all. Likewise, we also share that same that same peculiar experience as the water droplets do within their agglomerated state within the river, the stream. And we also have imperceptible forces acting upon us, upon our psyche, our consciousness. These forces are etched into nature, they're written into the stars, they're the very sacred geometry that form our world, right? That form our environment of experience. So we are but an agglomeration of archetypes, the collective unconscious, the primordial abyss of the sea, the river that we are that we are on cosmically, if you will always lead back into that point, right? Lead back into the sort of primordial unconscious. It's something that it again, it's imperceptible, but it's at the heart. It's the common humanity which underpins us all, and that's what's really affected by these astronomical events. I mean, you see the same thing, for example, even electrically or electromagnetically, with, for example, solar flares, or even, for example, the terrestrial radio frequency devices and emitters. They also play a part. For example, active denial systems is a direct example of that. They play a part on the psyche of people. They can repulse people. They can influence people's behavior and thought patterns. the voice of God technology, for example, which was trialed within Iraq, and there was a lot of experimentation using that done there. So all of this is interconnected. It's a holistic system, a unified field, if you will, that manipulates us. We're instruments of its will. We only have the illusion of free will. We have the freedom to exercise the will that we have been gifted by that imperceptible force which acts vicariously through us. And again, that's just my speculation, but that's, for a lot of people, that can be a bit of a leap, right? That idea that you have no agency and you've sort of got to surrender to that notion. But itself, you only act within the confines of the first principle of consciousness. You can't go beyond that, or of God.
Yeah, I think there's something
whatever.
to that for sure. And that was going to be a question I was going to ask you, was do you feel that, or do you believe that this is, that each and every person is vulnerable to this type of phenomena? Or do you think, there is the possibility that there is kind of some ability within some, I don't know, to be able to play God themselves on some level, and to, I don't know, is this I suppose it's the difference between, is this something that's kind of, only the individual is receptive to, or is it a collective thing? Therefore, I don't know, with enough energy
Well, just to
behind an
piggyback,
individual, can they even, not necessarily be, I'm trying to, lack of words here, but I'm trying to, targeted by this
Yes.
type of force. You know what I'm getting at?
Is there a predeterminative, not personality type, but archetype, which
Yes, exactly.
is
Sorry,
out with the influence of this? No, because if we understand the first principle, or God, to be, again, I just use God as it's a force, not necessarily an entity. It's an idea, a conceptual idea. If we understand that that is the agglomeration of everything, and not just the agglomeration of it in terms of form, but it's a formless singularity of all potential, then we are all sort of chained to it. I don't mean that in terms of it's a prison. I don't necessarily see this all as a prison. I think it's more like a school, that this world, this existence, but that's by the by. So
if I can quickly
yeah.
interject on that just quickly, when you say, of all potential, then is there not a scenario where that potential becomes possible, that singular intention could contribute some form of manifestation that isn't necessarily what you're talking about? If you know what I mean.
Where an archetype becomes God. Is that what you're alluding to?
Potentially, that could be one way of putting it. But basically, if you're playing off the concept of all potential, then I don't know. In simple terms, potentially anything is possible.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So potentially something could assume the archetype of all potentiality. I see what you're saying. Again, I would still say no, simply because, for example, what we observe within nature, the ontological principles that we can derive from what we see in nature, is that nature seems to have a certain fail-safe to it. So I again, it could be a potential that springs up, right? But in terms of probability and patterns, we don't tend to see that. So everyone, I would say, is influenced by these, the retrograde passage of the ions or ages. There's I don't think anyone can escape that. I'm not necessarily saying that it directly controls us like a marionette puppet. Though, and of course, there may be different categories of archetypes. You know, you have that idea in the Gnostic tradition of the Hylics. You know, literally the wooden head ones, right? Puppets. There's nothing going on, you know, between their ears. There's just a sort of soulless void, and then above them is I forget the Greek of it. It's the soulish ones, right? Ones who have partial souls or have souls, which, you know, is distinct from spirit because the soul is merely
I've lost you.
the can. Oops, sorry.
But I mean, if anyone else wants to chime in, go for it. But I was going to add in, is there any examples of these types of changes in the past that we can kind of reference to?
I'll let somebody else jump in if
I've lost
anyone
Silas,
has.
so if anyone else wants to
My
chime
my
in.
one major question before we go to examples is, if this is an imperceivable force that we're all susceptible to, then where do you land on the idea of fate and predeterminism, and how are these two things separable?
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Did you hear
Yeah.
my question?
Yeah. I heard your question. Yeah, it was just Critical was saying he couldn't hear me. It's not necessarily so. If we understand that the destination is already predetermined, however, the journey is not predetermined until obviously the terminus point, right? The transitionary state where all the roads lead to one.
And why is the destination determined?
It has to be. It seems to be. For example, within our own lives, our own lives are predetermined in its destination through death. That's something we see patterned throughout all of existence. That, again, because of the nature of time, because of its linearity, you will always have a beginning and an end, an aleph and a tav. So this is something that's sort of played upon within the aleph and tav eclipse and the ritualism that goes around, you know, it's surrounding that. It's something obviously the cabal are playing upon, but yeah, there's the destination is predetermined, not necessarily the journey. Again, until it gets to its sort of terminus point, you know, where all the roads lead into one. That'd be my opinion. I don't know if anyone else has a different opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to hear, because I guess, I don't know, I'd like to see how the two things can coincide and both be true at once, as far as the journey not being predetermined, but us also being able to, I guess, interact with this imperceivable force that's not necessarily just directly influenced, but something you engage with.
I was going to mention as well, regarding this idea of the changing of the ages or the aeons, this idea of the age of Aquarius and all of this. And there's other names for it throughout the mystery religions, but and funnily enough, even Carl Jung talked about it in his book. It's a little known book called Aeon, literally Aeon. And this idea of the demiurge, or even the hierophant, right, where we get our term for hierarchy from. And the hierophant literally means the revealer of the sacred, right? Again, hieros means revealer, right? He who reveals the sacred. You see that as it's sometimes depicted as the leontocephaline, right? Or the lion-headed hierophant, or the lion-headed god. And of course, this all links back to sort of Abrahamism and the Lion of Judah and all of this. But interestingly, August 21st, 2017, the first eclipse, the Great American Eclipse that started this entire ecliptic cycle of the Aleph Tav, that one which will end on April 8th, that was between Leo and Virgo, right? The zodiacal constellations and signs. The mirror image of that, if you're to, again, put the zodiacal signs in their sort of zodiacal wheel projection, Leo is directly adjacent to Aquarius, or, is facing Aquarius. Virgo is facing Pisces. And interestingly, 6 years, 6 months, 6 weeks, and 6 days later, April the 8th, 2024, the ecliptic event then, the sort of ending of the Tav, right? Ending of the Aleph, the forming of the Aleph, right? The beginning of a new dawn, if you will, in the esoteric conception of it. That occurs during Pisces and Aquarius. Very interesting. That's very significant. So it's something, by the way, Carl Jung talked about. He talked about in archetypal terms in that book Aeon, which I think was written in oh God, I forget now when it was written. It was in the 20th century, early 20th century sometime. And he made a point of discussing Aquarius and Leo and the contrasting elements of them, right? I just find that very interesting that you have him talking about that, this sort of esoteric psychologist talking about that. At the same time, you have, somewhat 100 years later or so, this event occurring where the same sort of ecliptic differences zodiacal differences are found. The Leo and Aquarius, Virgo and Pisces. It's not accidental. It can't be accidental. It's for example, even that idea of the 6 years, 6 months, 6 weeks, and 6 days. That is the full ecliptic cycle of this Aleph Tav. It's just very interesting. There's something to it. Some sort of sacred geometry.
Wouldn't that end up being basically 7 if we didn't have the calendar we had?
Pretty much, yes. Yeah. It's a
So the 7
7-year
days of
cycle.
creation
Bingo.
from the 2017 eclipse, and 2020 was the supposed Mercury-Venus conjunction, which caused the Bethlehem star,
Mm-hmm.
which supposedly, when America was formed in 1776, that's the last time it happened. So I'm not believing all the astrological stuff that they give us. I'd rather kind of watch it myself. But I mean, honestly, I think that the sky also has seasons amongst themselves, if that makes sense. Like, not only do we have seasons down here, they have seasons up there, which change their performance.
Yes.
I could
I
be
agree.
wrong, but
No, I agree. Even with the symbolism. So, for example, I mentioned the hierophant and the leontocephaline, and you see it on that Carl Jung's book of Aeon, and again the demiurge, or this god of time, the god of thresholds, right? You have Janus as well, where we get our word for the month of January. And of course that's when Aquarius and Pisces is roughly about that time period. But it's what was I going to say? Sorry, totally lost my train of thought there. Yes, it's this idea of time, of thresholds, of I don't know. It seems that the Lord is this idea of time. The Lord is time, and obviously space and matter as well. But the Lord fundamentally is time, and God is something beyond that. Something that resides within time, yes, or it can. It even formulates time, right? It's the creator that also acts as his own creation, if you will. But fundamentally, that's what they're revering. They're revering time. It's all based around time, and obviously time is linked to death and the cycles. But even with the symbolism, for example, you have the cedars of Lebanon, right, which is found throughout the Bible. That's the evergreen. It's something that's symbolic of heaven, immortality. But then you look at, for example, Zeus, Yahweh, Baal, even, for example, the Leontocephaline, the hierophant. It's all based around deciduous trees, right? Or trees that go along with the seasons, that rise and die, right? And renew and so on and so forth. It's like what you're saying, Linda. Everything you're seeing within the heavens, all of it, is based around time. It's a construct of time. That's what they revere. And obviously the Gnostic notion of it, which of course there's much variation between all of the various Gnostic traditions, it's all based upon this philosophical idea that time, space, and matter, specifically time though, primarily time, there is something beyond that. There's this innate sense of being which connects us to God, and also it's something that shows, that leads us to conclude that we are from the divine, right? Things such as that. But fundamentally, everything they're doing is based around time. It's based around the cycles. That's what it seems to be that they are. Some form of, ancient priest class now turned managerial class, trying to maintain their power, their grip on power, by manipulating time, by manipulating the cycles, ritualistically. That's what it seems to me. Oh, I think we have Zeal. Hello?
Just listening in here. I don't know. My brain isn't kind of functioning this evening, but I'm just trying to get my head around those comments that you made about time, sort of being like an arena of worship for the power structure, like that. Maybe it's the measure of chaos, because it provides a structure for chaos, to guide chaos. So that's maybe what time is in that sense. It gives them the capacity to guide the wheel with care. You know what I mean? In a kind of an ironic sense, because even though they worship the void, it would seem that time itself provides the structure or framework for manipulating that chaotic kind of infinite energy. So maybe they have, maybe there's some occult mechanism that they understand how they can sort of push and pull those forces.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. You go, Critical.
That's all right. Yeah, I dropped out earlier, but I think what I was going to get at was the manipulation of time for forms of control or whatnot, like you suggested, to take the rituals that we're perceiving in that sense, to use those rituals as a guide to what is occurring and what may occur. Is there a chance that there's an element of being misled on some of it, coming from this so-called priest class? If their rituals are truly affecting us or not, or whether it's our belief in those rituals affecting us that does affect us, if you know what I mean.
I tend, just in my opinion, I tend to think that their ritualism mainly empowers themselves. when within any initiation ritual, within any even what's a sort of ad hoc ritual, for example, in even cultural spaces like pubs or places like that, there's a certain ritual as well that goes on. Dining, having a dining experience, there's a ritual that goes on there as well. That mainly affects people that are in the cultural space, in that group space. It's not necessarily to affect the external, that environment which is external to that space, or the subjects that are external to that space. I don't think it's necessarily to affect us. It's to bind them together into a sort of Bacchic frenzy. And you see that all the way back with the Jupiter Sabazios cult, or the Yahweh Seviot. Jupiter Sabazios is a transliteration, a Latin transliteration of Yahweh Seviot, or Yahweh, Lord of the Hosts, Lord of the Armies. They would, in a Bacchic frenzy, it was called, they would swing the snake above their heads and shout, Attis, Oyes, Oyes, Attis, or some other Sabaoth, or Hail Sabaoth was another one. But Attis, Oyes, Oyes, Attis is, I believe it means good, or good health, or hail, right? Hail Attis, Attis hail, that idea, right? Or good health to Attis. Attis gives us good health. Things like that, right? That idea. And obviously the circling of the serpent above the head is symbolic of the Ouroboros, right? The snake which eats itself yet produces itself, right? So it's the paradoxical and yet simultaneous principle that maintains existence of mutual limitation and generation, right? So the reason it's above the head is, again, it's the veneration of time. That's what the Ouroboros is. It's time, the circularity of it, death leading to generation, literal sacrifice. That's what they believe the world is based upon. That's why we have all of these mechanisms of culling, war, famine, essentially, the four horsemen, plague as well. So that's above the head. It's above the mind. It's above the thalamus, the inner chamber, the seat of consciousness, the seat of God. Because like what we see throughout all of these various mystery religions is that they carry the Promethean or Luciferian flame. They want to be above God at all times possible. They wrestle with God. They wrestle with that principle of consciousness because they know there is an inherent power within it, but there's also inherent limitation. There's an inherent, again, out of reachness of it. It's very distant. It can't be reached. It can't be controlled. Yeah, it is chaotic, but it's chaotic in a way that's it's not able to be manipulated, So I think that's what they seek to do. Again, it's like the Tower of Babel, colonize the heavens. This idea, it's the same idea, for man to become the master of his own dominion. That's what they seek. I think that's obviously the cosmos maybe using us as instruments, to maintain the manipulation, to maintain the wheel. But that's going on a tangent, but
I mean, take on board the idea of, reality being a projection of the internal self, sort of thing. That's why I can't help but have kind of a natural skepticism towards a lot of this mythos and stories and astrology and what, the way we've kind of, I suppose, our ancestors have observed it and then relayed it further on down the line to us, that sort of thing, and then manipulation that happens in the process from those that are in charge of whatever information. It's the natural skepticism in me, kind of always does have that open space for. I don't know. When I observe reality itself, it doesn't always reflect all this mythos that I've learning or hearing over the years. Just an interesting thing I'll just keep in mind.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
A quick observation is like the chaos magic thing is that you have you have ritual or issue issue into consciousness, and consciousness then is into a relationship with the issue, with the ritual, and the result of all of that interaction is perception. So it's like chaos magic. To answer your question, critical, it does depend on the relationship with the viewer, the listener, or he or she who is being acted upon by the issue, by the ritual. So even if you don't have even if they're like kind of throwing stones into the lake, like you may get sections of society that will resonate around that issue or that ritual, or they may be influenced by it, but you don't necessarily need the entire society, to kind of fall for the ploy, so to speak. There was one there recently, Herbie Hancock, who's a piano player with Miles Davis. He was telling the story. He was in the middle of a gig, some concert they were doing, and he hit the wrong chord on the piano, like completely the wrong chord in the middle of a tune. And he put his two. This was like a live performance. And Miles Davis, he was playing trumpet, and Herbie Hancock, the piano player, said he put his two hands up to his ears because he was like, "Oh fuck!" I'm after hitting like the completely wrong ass chord. It sounds horrible. But what he realized in the moment was that Miles Davis played a melody over the chord that made the chord right. It took the tune into a whole different thing. So now this relates back to this issuance or ritual and the corresponding reaction of he who is being acted upon. So Miles Davis in that moment didn't see that as a wrong chord. He thought your man meant it and he went off in a whole different direction with the music. So that's a kind of chaos magic type scenario where you have, that kind of heady brew of interaction of forces where there's no wrong, something else comes out of it. But as you said earlier, you can see through it, or it's not resonating for you because you see through it or whatever. But for a lot of people, it is resonating for them. So it's like there's a kind of social consciousness construct that's the summary of all these kinds of things that maybe are initiated at an occult kind of deep insider level with the deep insight into ancient systems and pantheons of gods and goddess and aligned with celestial events and etc. But it's all done for a reason, to channel energy into that moment. But what's taken out of it, the long story short, is belief is a hell of a drug. Like if the person believes a thing, that takes on a whole new paradigm shift. It's a whole new reality is born. So I think they know that, and I think they're playing that kind of game. Possibly it's tied in with time as well. That it's within time. They're master strokes. They are master strokes. And one thing I was thinking about on another note during the week, also with reference to music, is the level of genius. And when I say genius, perhaps you could say dark genius, but the level of actual kind of old-fashioned IQ, high IQ genius stuff that's going on is sadly it's above my head anyway. But I'm just an ordinary person, but that's the sense I have of the thing, that you're dealing with an intelligence that's within the human form, but that's of a higher form than what you or I maybe perhaps used to. You're dealing with very very, very intelligent people, very highly, with just a high capacity brain who can kind of understand things on a deeper, quicker level, maybe. And maybe one way, just as a quick, how you might account for that is simply breeding. If you've been in those positions for long enough over generations, it takes on a kind of character. So that was something I was thinking about recently. Anyway, that's the end of my point.
It's interesting because that was really good analogy as well, with the whole sort of going with the flow off the wrong note in music too.
Yeah.
And that was kind of speaking to something I was trying to get at earlier with the outcomes being inevitable. It doesn't quite sit with me because of the chaotic nature of our reality in general. I just think that so much of what we do and believe will have such an influence on direction and things in general.
Oh yeah,
But
100%, man. And like, it's a thing in the chaos theory stuff that minor. If you look at the trajectory of variables of things which may occur over a period of time, and say that the period of time is from A to B, but from A to B, maybe say 10 million years. So from point A to point B, what variables affect the development of a system? As you say, like, minute differences is, for example, on our kind of point of view, would have a huge effect on the system as it evolves over that time period. But this is a thing that they've proven in chaos theory, that micro deviations at point A, at the incipient point, at the nascent point, the beginning point, if you have minute deviations at that point, which at the earliest point are not even detectable as deviations, because they may all be coming from a singularity, so it may be impossible to measure deviations. So if you think of the deviations moving from point A to point B as having an angular movement apart from each other, that initially they look like a single line, but only over time you discover actually they're moving apart, and they're forming like this kind of triangular, kind of angular movement. So the point being that in the chaos theory thing, micro deviations at an incipient point can have a huge effect on the system, on the evolution of the system, because those deviations only become apparent at a later time period. So they've proven stuff like this with the analysis of things like smoke, how smoke moves, and trying to predict how smoke will move within a system, and how other things like social engineering stuff like that. The likes of what we're doing here. It's a micro deviation, but the irony then, to throw a spanner in the works, is that what we're doing, for example, is caused by the system. So we're, by the fact that we're having, shall we say, deviant discussions, rebellious discussions, or discussions that are even subjectively trying to analyze or understand the world around us, they're caused essentially by that same system. So even though we're attempting to think outside the system, we are of the system in an ironic sense, but so just a quick point on that, this chaos theory and what was the other one I mentioned? Chaos magic. I think people who actually improvise in music, or people who would pick up a pen to write a poem or a short story with no clue about what they're going to write about, understand this in an intrinsic level. Like, you get somebody who writes amateur poetry, for example, a short poem, free verse, and you hand them a pen, and boom, they'll just blurt something out, and it'll have metaphor, it'll have color, it might have character, it'll have movement, it'll have timbre, and you're like, where the hell did that come from? But they're kind of in that they're in the field of that energy. But I have the sense that this power structure is very much so in the field of that type of energy, and feel themselves to be masters of it. But I don't. Go ahead.
sorry. No, you
No,
finish
go
your
on.
point, Zio.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna mention it's almost like people tap into that energy. They tap into it, and it's again this is this notion of the being, right? The first principle, that which is primordial, the primordial unconscious. So I think this is what the Sumerians even were speaking of when they discussed the Abzu. And we get our term abyss from that, right? The Abzu, the primordial ocean, right? When the river, Orion at the top of the Eridanus, the river, will always run out into the sea, right? That ultimately is enlightenment, right? You dissolve into the primordial unconscious. You dissolve into that which is God, pure potential, undifferentiated and unmanifested. It is in those states, for example, in improv, right, where you're on the cusp, on the precipice of destruction, yet simultaneously you're also on the edge of glory, right? And it's in those states of heightened danger and also heightened reward where you also have heightened consciousness, right? You have, again, it's almost a ritualism in and of itself. It alters your very state of consciousness, right? It opens a door. It allows you to peer out into the primordial waters of the abyss of consciousness, right? Where consciousness derives from. Not in terms of form, I'm merely using metaphor here. It's more a formless thing, but it's something you tap into. I mean, thoughts themselves, imagination, like what you're saying, where does it come from, right? Musicians, how can they just come up with something? I mean, people don't really even have to be musically gifted in terms of instrumentation to come up with ideas, lyrics, melodies. You can simply hum them. I mean, it's all of it is it's extremely fascinating. I mean, it gets to the fundamental principle behind existence itself and everything, right? I think, like what you're saying, these people are they're children of the void, right? Of that abyss, of that primordial unconscious sea of pure potential. And it's what they're using to sort of maintain, again, that Sator square, right? Sator arepo tenet opera rotas, or he who is without a knowledge of good or evil, or a care for good or evil, manipulates the wheel with skill or care, right? I mean that fundamentally it's controlling the elements of nature, which at their most fundamental state are contained within us, right? You see the pentacle. It has the four elements: fire, earth, air, water. Obviously, as well, earth is the artificial element. But at the top, it's hierarchy, the hierophant, if you will, the revealer of the sacred, is the spirit. It's the consciousness. It's the primordial sea. That which is both the projector and perceiver of the four elements, right? Which comprise the fixed pillars of existence. I mean, this is it's really fundamental to the conspiracy, if you will, right, of power. That's what I would say.
Wouldn't you say though that it ends up being ordered chaos? Like that might be the predeterminate part of it, is the order, and the chaos is every other aspect of it.
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree with that. What would you say on that, Zio? It is ordered
Jesus,
chaos. Yeah.
I don't know. I can't answer the question directly immediately, but I was just having the thought about they are the conductor of the orchestra, and they have learned over time. They've mastered the art, and they're about to, they're about to head for their, what's the word, Silas? Opus magnum, is it? Your
Oh, magnum opus. Yeah.
magnum opus. It's your greatest work of art, right?
Yeah, your
Your
great
magnum
work.
opus. So they're going
Yeah,
for
but part of that's not predetermined because they don't know how every person in the world will react to it. So that's the chaos because they cannot predict that. They cannot measure it and forecast it.
quite
They
possibly.
can
Yeah.
forecast a percentage of it
Mm-hmm.
because they're able to do that because the majority of people act a certain way or react a certain way, that kind of thing. But the rest of it, they cannot. So I think they play these things out, and some of them fail, but we would never know they fail, right?
To me, there'd be a definitive point between the orchestra and the composer, using that analogy still. So they can orchestrate it as much as they like. Not necessarily doesn't necessarily mean to me that then they are composing our reality, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I really love this whole metaphor. I mean, it's just so brilliant. It describes kind of the situation we're living out right now. At least, I hope so. I hope that we can influence the the actual sheet music that's been laid out.
But I kind of have the sense that from a poetic, ironic point of view, that they should, in the ultimate creative act, they should self-annihilate. Just as they're about to enter through the pillars, when it's at their fingertips, they should self-destruct. And I think there's some little bit of them. It's just an intuition I have, or maybe a flight of fanciful thought. But there's some intuition I have that's embedded in them. They're going to do a kind of a Kurt Cobain on it, They're going to, or a Vincent van Gogh, because it's just sort of in them to do that. That right when they're about to, touch down, they're going to just stop with the ball and the pitch, just stop dead running, with the crowd screaming at him and the commentator going, "What the hell is going on?" They're just going to stop, and the defensive line is going to crush them to pieces. And I can see him doing something like that, just as a kind of a artistic flight of fancy, You know what I mean? Just as you were about to get the gold medal, you're like, fuck it, no, I'm not going to show up, or why? It's like it's kind of something like that would be, to my mind, would be fitting for them.
Well, here's another idea as well. This idea of hubris, right, which, in its conceptualization within the Greek language, relates to this notion of, blasphemy, essentially, right, going above the gods. And I mean, it's something that is essentially characteristic of this Faustian archetype, right, or the Promethean or Luciferian archetype, that within their lack of acknowledgement of the imperceptible force, which not only provides them their experience upon the terrestrial plane, but also provides them with their technology, right, in terms of they tap into it, right? And of course, they seek to control it, right? They seek to literally to become it, to become the source of all. However, perhaps that archetype is being remotely, not implanted, but remotely increased within the political class, within the aristocratic class, within the cabal, to thus engender that sater repo tenet opera rotas, that they don't really even need to forecast all of the various, again, minute deviations, not just within the inception of their agenda, but in the inception, within the middle, the middle process of it, the processing of it, up to its terminal point, either fruition or complete destruction. So perhaps nature is using everything that they're doing, all of the technology that they're creating, even themselves to a degree. Of course, like the river, they are merely an agglomeration of drops within it, right? So likewise to us, we're merely an agglomeration within nature, which is indicative of this river. We are merely agglomerations of these archetypal fragments, right? That coalesce together to maintain the circularity, the motion of the wheel. So therefore, they perhaps are being used. It's like a forced evolution. Like there was a term that I heard someone use, this idea of punctuated equilibrium, right? That nature is merely just establishing their technology, again vicariously through their consciousness, to thus drive forth the onward motion of time, the onward motion of the satyr wheel. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's a potential. Who knows? I hope that's the case. Yeah. Mhm.
I don't see whoever they are out to destroy anything. I think they set things in motion, and the more people believe them, it's left
Yep.
to destroy itself.
Mhm.
So it's like
Yes.
they're not really truly at fault for any of it.
So they act almost as stewards of the enclosure. Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, that's a very, it's not even plausible, it's more a very strong potential, you know. It goes beyond just plausibility. That's a strong potential. Absolutely.
I also remind that even in the Gnostic mythology, Gaia, or which represents the fallen Sophia, wants to be saved. So she is on the side of conspiring against the rule of Yaldabaoth, right? So that's why they view, for example, Mary Magdalene as the Gnostics, and of course I'm generalizing, view Mary Magdalene as a personification of the fallen Sophia that gives herself, so she recognizes in Jesus the primordial spirit, the Son, the actual Son manifestation of the true Father, and therefore she surrenders her materiality and becomes, aligned with the so-called kingdom. So in that sense, I do agree with Linda that it is not the actual demiurge, let's say, or as some would say, the devil. It could be more or less interchangeably used. Cannot actually perform any destruction. The spirit is outside of the reach. But what it can do is suggest self-infliction, such as many accounts of schizophrenics, for example, that say that voices tell them to do things. And these voices can at times be overwhelming, but there is always, unless it has been completely defeated, there is always the presence of the will. And when I say will here, I mean, essential will, which can resist or redirect or even casts away those influences. So, given that, I do agree that there will not be a direct application of destruction, but that it can be suggested, heavily suggested, until it is self-performed, or with the intent of it being self-performed. But there is also the, let's say, other side that balances it, which is conspiring, let's say, to retain the connection to that essential spirit, and, let's say, align itself with life, and life here with capital L, right? Not life in the mere material sense.
I was going to mention as well regarding Sophia. Interestingly, within the Gnostic creation myth, now again, there's some variation between them all, and of course, what we're learning from them, bar what appears within the Nag Hammadi texts, ultimately, what we understand of these various sects are, and what they believed, is pretty much from their detractors, right? So we have to bear that in mind. But it seems that Sophia, of course, the sin of the virginal birth, the immaculate conception of Yaldabaoth, right? That sinful act, which established the last Archon, which was Yaldabaoth, who, in his remoteness from the other Archons and obviously the monadic source, again, primordial unconscious, or the pure potential undifferentiated and unmanifested, he believed himself to be the only God, right? The complete inversion, again, if you will, of the Platonic good, right? Within the idea of the Platonic forms and such, right? So it seems that Sophia, again, if I'm picking this up correctly, it's either in the eschatology or in the etiology, right at the beginning of the Genesis, the sort of creation story, that Sophia looks into the Grail, sees her reflection in the Grail, or that is something she must pursue. I'm sorry if I'm going on a tangent here, but I wanted to get your take on that, if you had any information regarding that, or any insight or take on it.
Well, it is the mirror analogy that is very essential, I would say. It's probably one of the best parallelisms. Well, the words aren't flowing today.
Parallelism.
Yeah.
Sorry, parallelism. Oh God, I can't even say it.
Yeah. Anyway, that can be used because, and it's also, of course, used in the male symbology of Narcissus, right? That looks in the mirror as well, in the pond, so it could be considered the Grail as well. But it is used exactly, in my view, because it represents Sophia was one of the aeons, and then through pride, because again, I think that what generated her, what you named Immaculate Conception, of course, the creation without a consort, was pride. Through pride, by looking at herself and her reflection, which was her creation, she fell, right? And so that is what I think is symbolized there, and she is sort of, in a sense, the actual fragmentations of spirit, of pure spirit, that are here, are from her. So indirectly from the source, of course, but in a metaphorical sense, and using this mythos just as an analogy, we the spirit within us would be fragments of her, so of a feminine that fell. And so you could see the spiritual feminine as Sophia, and the material feminine as Gaia, or material nature. So I think that the Grail, the looking in the Grail symbology, there is just another iteration of a very used metaphor of the mirror as being an act of creation. So the looking in the mirror already creates the manifestation from the point of view of an aeon, I think.
Sophia also has phi right in the middle of her name, which is also symbolic. And I think that's kind of how deep the biblical scriptures go as far as breaking down how things are.
It has what? Sorry, Linda, I didn't.
Phi,
Phi.
P-H-I.
Mhm.
Oh, phi. Yeah, okay, the Greek letter. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Which is a 1 and a 0, right?
I was going to mention as well, it's also the 21st Greek letter, so it's 7 times 3, or 3 times 7, which is something you also find it within Genesis. 1-1. 37 times 73 produces 2,701. Individually, that adds to 10. The full totality, the number of Sephirah upon the Sephirotic tree. And of course, 37 and 73 are the only two reverse primes. Oh yeah, in Hebrew, the gematria value of Genesis 1:1 is 2,701, which is 37 times 73. Yeah, 1 and 0, which is the 10 as well. Which, interestingly, in binary, unlike the 1 and 1, which are the confines of the spectrum of time, if you will, right? Of the eternal. The 1 and 0 is that which is the infinite, right? It's the one and it's the ending of the cycle, right? It's that which is a determinate. But it's a determinate, not how would I word this? Oh God, I'm too tired. Yeah, it's a determinate in and of itself. In terms of its internal quality, it's not necessarily a determinate by, for example, the negation of something that's external to it. So it's, in essence, it just is, if that makes sense. So, what's the word? A sort of first principle or a prima causa. It's not dependent on anything. Yeah. Interesting. I didn't even notice that.
Yes, and that is the description of almost verbatim that is in the Apocryphon of John. That the one is needs nothing and is complete and exists by itself, and so there's nothing. Which is that's actually what I was in that part in the chapter that you asked, which is a representation of the usurpation of Yahweh, because it tries to force those qualities to be seen upon him, when just the fact that he's trying to force them shows that he doesn't have them, right? So, yeah.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's even that idea of the I am. Again, it's not the what will I be. It's not the pure potential of becoming. It's that which is already. It already is. It's fully formed. It's negated all potential into a pure determinate. And again, if if it's negated that potential into a determinate, then it must be, by its own definition, it must be not God. It must not be the source. It must not be the singularity point. Yeah. But so you have that sort of fundamentally erodes irreparably this idea of Yahweh being God. But
This is why I like to stress the idea that not all these rituals and mythos and that have the potential and attention we might give it on some level.
yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, it's you're dealing with something that isn't actually the source. It's merely, using the source, using that potential to attempt to manipulate its way to power, to usurp the source of that power, Yeah.
And how do you think we best discern between the two? The actual source versus an imitator, excuse me.
I think Spinoza put it well, where that idea of all that is and funnily enough, Zeal pointed me to this, I believe a year ago. All that is a determinate is the product of negation. So essentially, everything that is the product of negation is that which is existence, right? It's the idea of the Y principle, right? It appears in the Stairway to Heaven too. There's two paths. They mention it, Robert Plant, but in the long run, God, I forget the next bit. But I've essentially he mentions this a winding road, stairway to heaven, whispering wind, the same idea, right? So, if ultimately what you're seeking to do is, it's very Buddhist, right? Anything that's attempting to tempt you with money, power, wealth, again, like what occurred with Jesus in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, the devil, the adversary, Yahweh, if you will, came to Jesus, came to Christ, and sought to bargain with him so that he wouldn't wake up from the dream, that he wouldn't, again, take back his agency that he surrendered through temptation, that we all surrender, rather, through temptation, right? So the only way you can be shackled to the post in the Platonic cave is for you to put the shackle on your own leg and for you to turn the key upon it and then chuck the key away, right? Again, that's metaphorical for this thing that we do, that a lot of us do, right? Which is we seek after material possessions, not just merely to survive, but we attempt to try and self-actualize through these material vessels, these material objects, even through people themselves, right? We do have a tendency to objectify people, right? I don't mean that in terms of the feminist idea of, oh my God, they're sexually objectifying this scantily clad model, right? Or whatever. No, she's objectifying herself. But what I mean is you objectify people. So, for example, you may use people for emotional support rather than just value them as an end in and of themselves, a value in and of itself, and something with intrinsic value. Or another one is to do good because you want to. You either get a dopamine hit off it, you want to feel good, you want to post up to social media, or you want to, attempt to increase your piety. But again, it will have the inverse effect. So it's not necessarily, it's necessarily being, to be, right? To be or not to be, that is, that is the fundamental question of existence. You're either in the moment, you're either acting as a being with consciousness intrinsic to it, something that thinks, or you don't. You become a Hylic, you become an NPC, you become something that's shackled to the post within the cave. That'd be my opinion. That's how to differentiate the two,
Yeah.
Is again, not to constantly be skeptical of a lot of this stuff, but
No, I
is
like your
the-
skepticism.
So the being shackled to, I mean, you used materialism as the example, but I would also throw in, the shackled to information and knowledge and things like that, and how we allow that to govern our
Yeah.
perception on reality and the outcome of things in general. Anyone?
No, I totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, it's like what we were mentioning on off air. I think right at the beginning of our conversation, where people can overanalyze, right? Can overanalyze something, and that again, like what Zio was stating as well, or alluding to, these people are geniuses, but within a genius is a spark of madness, right? That's what really spurs on ingenuity, right? Thinking outside the box. But if you're outside the box, you're charting a new frontier. So again, you have to be mad to do that, to go into the heart of darkness, right? So the heart of darkness will affect you. It'll influence you. It may even consume you, right? So I would say, for example, if you're going into any frontier, you want to create a sort of trail behind you, leading back to home, right? In this case, leading back to sanity. You don't want to pursue knowledge for the sake of knowledge, right? You want to pursue knowledge for the sake of dissolving back into that which birthed all knowledge, right? You only pursue knowledge to such a threshold in which it equips you intellectually and spiritually with the tools required to sort of alleviate the suffering that you may possess within this world, to alleviate the burden of the world itself, right? To provide you peace. So, for instance, I wouldn't say to pursue knowledge or technology or what have you for example, in the let me choose my words carefully here, in the field of pharmakeia, right? I don't think there's much good you can do there. But there's people in that field that pursue knowledge, that pursue the technologies and that's birthed from that knowledge, simply because they may get a dopamine hit off it, or simply because it's the path of least resistance, right? And that's the problem with knowledge. If you follow the path of least resistance, pursuing knowledge, you'll lead to self-destruction. So you have to be cognizant of all of that. It's really the pillars you build it all on. Sorry, Linda.
Jesus. Well, I just wanted to cut in. You talked for a long time. But
I did, sorry.
Isn't this the story of Jesus being betrayed by Judah, which was an outside source, basically? And then he carried his cross to his own crucifixion. And at the end, he was at a crossroads after his resurrection because he was a new person, right? Which way am I going to go now? Isn't that what every human being does after they crucify themselves in some way, shape, or form? They have to figure out where they're headed now.
Yeah, Silas, you made a point kind of about that point that Linda just made there recently about the irony, that quest for knowledge, that you end up with the crucifixion, you end up destroying yourself. There was a kind of an ironic thing in it, like that once you embark on that path, you eventually, the quest for truth kind of ends in a kind of self-destruction. As Linda was saying there, you hit the point of
Right, and
where do
I'm
I go?
picturing nowadays with the alt media and everything else, that all the rabbit trails that everybody's going down and they think the world's going to end and all that stuff. It's like, where is that going to lead them, right? They're eventually going to have to come to a crossroads and be like, I was deceived. Just like Judas deceived Jesus, right? Although, they're going to blame somebody, but technically you have to go into the darkness and blame yourself and say, I was at fault. I let myself get sucked down that hole. Nobody forced you. Nobody pulled your arm and dragged you down there. You chose to dig the hole. So,
In fact, in the mythos, Judas was helping Jesus accomplish his mission, so what he came to do by doing that. So without Judas, probably the crucifixion wasn't going to well, at least like I said, according to the mythos, wasn't going to occur.
Well, it's that ironic. Like, to accept that level of truth is to self-destruct. To look back
Yes.
and see where you messed up so badly that you became this parody, enemy of yourself, and you manifested. You became that entity. And that moment then where you look at that and you realize you did that is a self-destruction. So it's like, it's this irony. This highest truth it can be, I guess, a kind of self-destruction. Because it's like you gotta look back.
But what is destroyed, in fact, is not you, but the concept of you. So
yeah. But it's still a painful process, right?
of course,
Because
yeah.
It's a crucifixion.
Yeah.
It begins with self-judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you're between the two poles, the two, the pillar of severity and mercy, or in terms of the crucifixion, you're between the two polarities of evil.
Yeah.
You have to find a resolution between the two. But again, you go into the darkness, but the light can only discern itself within darkness. That's the irony of it all. So if you don't delve into the darkness, you'll find nothing. Your life will be, hierophant, in terms of the Gnostic tradition. It'll be nothing. It'll just be, it'll be extremely regretful. I can imagine. Well, it depends. I mean, it depends upon your level of even base knowledge, But your life will be of little value or purpose or what have you.
Speaking,
but
it's even sorry, just quickly. Speaking of looking for the darkness, because it gets thrown around a lot in general. Do you not think you can extrapolate that also towards if you were looking into the lighter side of yourself, and then also looking into the darkness that you perceive in others, or what you're told about others? Is there a certain irony to the things we accuse those that are in control of doing? If we were to look within ourselves enough in the light enough to understand that we're probably not capable of that ourselves, for us to then choose to believe that others are capable of it. I think you can kind of, as an inverse, you could extrapolate that out to that on some level. if that made sense.
No, I think we are capable of that, and I think
Mm.
that's
That's
the
what I was going
irony.
to say.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it's exactly the opposite. It's because we are capable that we witness them doing it. If we weren't, then we would probably be in the unconscious side of society, where we do not see them as we do not
Well-
see these people or forces as villains.
Well, capable is one thing for sure. We are all capable of any of that, but whether you would act upon that capability or not, you know what I mean? Like where you sit with your moral or whatnot. It's that's the point I think I was trying to drive at.
Yeah. But I think that
then that's a deeper conversation, right? Because is what they're doing completely evil because they're not forcing anybody to do anything? They're just. It gets into this whole conversation of what is evil, and honestly, I don't think we have a true meaning of that.
Evil can also bring about that which is good in terms of its utility.
Yeah.
So, for example, we're the result of that. I think it was Zeal that brought up the point that we are ultimately products of the system. The system that we despise. We are also, the fumes of it. And furthermore,
Could the
as well.
system not be a product of us, though, at the same time?
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
Sorry, I cut over you. I was just going to ask, could the system not be a product of us at the same time?
Yes. Yeah, it's there's a mutual reciprocity there, between both sides, feeding it. I totally agree. It's a bit like, consciousness in that regard. That idea of as above, so below. The
Right,
eyes
I
are
mean, the
both
whole
the window and the
system.
person.
The
You go,
whole
Linda.
system is the snake eating its tail. If
Bingo.
you want to think about it that. Yep.
Yeah.
or
Tail feet.
creating itself from its mouth. Depends on how we see it. It's either eating
Yeah.
or creating itself. Yeah. Depends on the point in time if it's an expansion or a contraction. So
Well, this is the thing. This idea of that we're all capable, but if we were in that position, power is an extremely intoxicating drug, and furthermore as well, the sort of opium den of power, in terms of the cultural sphere that you're in, when you have power, you don't know any difference. You don't know any different, right? And if you, again, with knowledge, provides you the ability to empathize with multiple, points of perception, angles of perception, right? That's how we can dialectically reason. That's how we can form opinions on things and hopefully come to a better outcome. So this is the problem with political classes, that because all of the power, the wealth, everything is, all of the material is centralized at the hierarchy, at the apex of the hierarchy, then essentially they form an echo chamber, right? And after a while, they have an inability to empathize with anyone else. They have an inability to see their decision making from the position of the lower echelons, right? Be it in whatever strata. That fundamentally creates what Zeal was talking about, not just at the beginning, but throughout the process of power. It creates the minute deviations in the system, which eventually create what's the word? They become exponential in their chaotic potential within the system, right? Within their entropic potential within the system. So, yeah, it seems like everything is all of this is cyclical. It's all based on human psychology. That itself is then based on, higher, what we would term on our level of perception here, imperceptible forces themselves, right? the stars, the celestial seasons, all of this. Yeah.
But it's
Yes, and
maybe as well,
sorry.
Oh, you
just
go.
very quickly, like in the spiritual sense, that maybe we are in the positions of power. We're in the highest position of power because we're outside and we can see it and we understand it.
Good point.
Yep.
If you want to see it that way, which is accurate in my opinion, we are the king. The battle is over us, not over anything else. It's when you see a psyop or whatever, it's for us, not for the matter itself or for nature or for anything else, but our minds, our spirit, our will. So absolutely, I would agree with that. And I would just like to compliment with one thing, that is not to excuse me. It's not to be taken as a truth by any means, but just an hypothesis that I present, which is perhaps for us, and this is merely focusing on those that can see a bit more of the reality than just the more or less unconscious level. That perhaps for us it was the contact with this vision, this extra vision, let's say, that allowed us some different moral foundation, like Zeal was talking about, or it was it Zeal or critical, I'm not sure, about perhaps if we were there, we would do differently. Well, that would probably stem from the fact that we saw not only the consequences, but the process, the whole thing. We saw a bit more than at the unconscious level, and therefore, perhaps, and this is just an hypothesis, perhaps that gave us a different foundation than, for example, someone recruited from the unconscious level that would immediately perhaps integrate. But this is, like I said, an hypothesis merely, not saying that it's a fact or that I consider it to be true.
Yeah, it's valid.
Yeah, but if all of the people like us were to somehow be in control at this point and look at humanity for the sadness that it is, and that some people need help and some people, need guidance and all the other things, would we do it properly? Or would we? You see what I mean?
As
It leads
imperfect as they
into
are, so yeah.
We've got noble intent and not shocked and Beaver here as well. I don't know if they had anything to add to that.
Wow, it seems as though that I've stumbled onto a doozy. Again, appreciate the depth of the conversation, and I'm sorry that I don't have the greater context. Just coming in, kind of taking it all in. I was still contemplating the Judas Christ idea that emerged here about 15 minutes ago, and spidered off into these wonderful ideas. And I was actually reflecting on, I think Armand, you had a little bit of a expose on the Excalibur the other day, or the luge. And I guess I was just sitting in this idea of sitting in this state of agreement that ultimately, at the end of the day, when we consider the questions, the important questions of who am I and where am I and why am I, somewhere along the way, the why am I seems to be to die to oneself. And I think that was suggested by a number of you using different terminology, but that I think it was in the context of the consequence of going on this quest for knowledge. Carlos Castaneda, Don Juan, you said the truth will set us free, but it also can be devastating. And I know I've been devastated on this journey more than a couple of times, uncovering, looking under these stones. You see the filth that's underneath there, and ultimately, though, it's been a journey to the self, and it's been this journey to essentially a recognition after 50 years of that I've just fashioned my own story. In fact, my partner, who's an adept of sorts, she's a wonderful human. She pointed this out to me not too long ago as I was spending some of my time uncovering these ideas, either with you or on my own, and kind of have this warrior mentality or this hero idea, or this savior idea, going back to the Christ concept, right? And I find myself wearing that supersuit there, and really at the end of the day, I'm just living. I'm living that story. In this dualistic world that we live in, I want to be a part of the solution, certainly, and not a part of the problem. But I tend to, like most of us, step out of who I really am, which is topic for another day, perhaps. But and just wear this badge of honor that somehow who I say I am is must be held in higher regard than who they are. And the ones are afflictors, the ones that are victimizing me. And it's been quite a journey. And I credit many of you for helping me see myself. And I thank you for that. And I know I'm going to be around a little bit longer having these discussions with you guys, because I think we're onto something here. I don't know as if we've nailed it yet. But what I'm trying to do is be a better guy tomorrow. And that means I need to die to the guy that I am today. And frankly speaking, after having this conversation, I feel like I'm on my way to jumping back up on that cross. And
I was just picturing the movie Journey to the Center of the Earth, or whatever that is, which is the material us. And you have to go there. You have to go there to realize what you've allowed yourself to be, to come out of it, in my opinion.
Wasn't the entrance at the North Pole in that in the Jules Verne novel?
Yep, I think it was. Yep.
Yeah, and it was also in the North Pole that Dr. Victor Frankenstein had to face his monster. So
It's
interesting.
all in the mind.
yeah. His creation that he made from pieces of the external world, of the dead world, let's say. Yeah.
Would you be kind enough to throw some context with regards to the North Pole idea, like the dog star and the whole throw some context on there, will you?
Regarding the North Pole itself, it has been regarded in several ideologies, let's say, as the sort of center of the world. The Mount Meru, that kind of thing, and also as a sort of portal to the lower and the higher of beyond this realm. So you would even have the idea of Hyperborea that I'm sure you've already heard, which was the let's say pure north, the great north, where these fantastic sort of godlike beings were supposed to exist, and so on and so forth. Even you could argue that the if there was to be a physical location for the pantheons of the Greek gods and the branched off Roman gods, it would most probably be the North, what is called North Pole. Whether it's a pole or not, it's a different matter. But I think that is the reason for the choice over there. And the fact is, we do see a lot of artistic sort of tendencies to use the North Pole as this, like Linda was saying, a sort of crossroads, right? Because you can go to either heaven or hell from there, right? And in one of the most, I think it's one of the most spectacular inner journeys novels ever written, Frankenstein. It was a natural choice that the confrontation with the created monster would occur there, and so of course Jules Verne probably also used that as the entry point to the center of the earth for the same reasons. And whether those reasons were merely ideas that emerged, or if they were ideologies put in place, because it's highly probable that these writers were involved in secret societies, of course, is a different matter altogether. But the symbology is there nevertheless.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And this leads me to, it's sort of a different topic, but on the same thing, on the same line as the North Pole. All the cold regions, supposedly up north, you would tend to think that that's probably where the white people came from, because they were like snow bunnies, right? They had white fur. They probably had white hair, blue eyes, and it was based on the environment. I went down this rabbit hole a while back, and it made perfect sense to me that the temperatures and environment would create what you look like on the outside, not what you were on the inside.
Whether it was
yeah,
like that or not, historically, the Hyperboreans were depicted as blonde blue eyes, and Hyperboreans, Iberians, Hibernians, that all stems from the same word. In fact, even Brazil comes from the word Hyperborea, because it's High Brazil, Hyper Brazil, Hyperborea. That has also been checked. So all these places, let's say, of course, these names were given to stand for a mythological place, but the peoples that inhabited these gods, the gods in the mythological sense, that inhabited these regions supposedly in those mythos, were described as that, yes, as blonde, blue-eyed, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Whether that's valid or not, that's a different question, but it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, I went down there that rabbit hole just for the fact that I was studying how nature worked and why the northern region animals are white, and it's for camouflage. So it would make sense that humans were once that way, wouldn't it? I mean, that's where I got that from. So
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure whether like I fully could latch on to that kind of thing, just because people are quite different than animals. I'm not saying we're not subject to nature, but I mean, now even now you have Eskimo populations that I don't think they have blue eyes all the time. I wouldn't say or blonde hair all the time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, people travel there and mate. So, I mean, that's been mixed also. I mean, the whole world has been mixed. I'm talking from the beginning. I wasn't
beginning.
talking now. Yeah.
Right. Still, though, so you're saying that because it's the beginning, then nature it hasn't been blemished yet, if you know what I mean. So, like, the reason why Eskimos are the way they are now is because of mixed kind of heritage and that thing. Like, we're
No, that's
outside of nature now.
yeah, I think we are outside of nature at this point because I'm talking about like all the races are kind of intermingled. Yes, there's still some that are left, but I still think that stemmed from the environment, and I could be wrong. But if you have a lot of sun, you would have to have the pigment to protect you from that, right? So
Yeah, I think that's there's definitely
But
something to that.
Linda, if that theory were correct, though, wouldn't that indicate that each race had its own origin in those particular areas, and it, like the whole
yeah, which
Adam and Eve idea, we came from two people that begat two more, and on and on and
right,
on,
which
and everybody was
yeah,
separate in the beginning.
right. That's what I'm saying. It goes against, but I think I think the metaphorical value in that we came from two people is within our minds, right? We came from our mother and father, and I think that's all they know about creation itself. They don't know where all these things are, and that's just how they explain it. And by not telling us that they think that it was caused by environment, I mean, of course they wouldn't tell us that. They're giving us all the comforts to protect us from environment. They're giving us market value. So they wouldn't tell us that because people would start moving around, you know?
I mean, on the one hand, it's almost like you could say that people evolved, I guess, to be able to be compatible with their environment, which could mean that everybody was the same in the beginning, or that people were spread out in the beginning and just evolved from. I mean, I don't know. none
but
of it
what if
really.
everybody
I
did?
don't.
Yeah, but what if everybody
Hmm?
did come from the northern region and they did spread out and adapted to it? Then their skin would change to protect themselves. Because I think human I think humans are capable of that, right? We are capable of adapting to our environments just like animals when they have to move because of a forest fire and they have to go to a different environment. Some of them struggle, but most of them survive and learn to adapt with their new food, their new environment, everything.
Yeah, I was going to ask why it couldn't have been the other way, but I think I missed the beginning of the conversation because there's something about the North Pole you guys were talking about being like an origin, alpha and omega or something like that. I guess I don't know, but yeah, I missed that part.
Well, it started off, I think, with the North Pole symbolically representing the mind. But if this place has a mind, you would have to wonder where it would be, right?
Well, yeah, the mind is interesting to me. You can't. I don't think anybody's ever, like opened a skull and found a mind in there. So who knows? Who knows where the mind is? We think it's the brain, but I don't know. Is it?
Well, it's certainly not the most important organ, if you ask me, Farce. I, I can make an argument that the heart is far more valuable than the mind. They say is associated with the physical thing we call a brain. Um, I was going to ask, maybe this will take us too far off track, but back to the kind of the North Pole. Anybody brushed up on their astronomy, or I should say, maybe the alternate cosmologies or astrology with regards to the North Pole? What comes to mind is the North Star and some of the, and I wonder, for some reason, I have it in my head that there's a correlation between the North Pole and the North Star. Perhaps not, but is there any there? Anybody got any intel on that? Because I don't. So okay, evidently not.
Well,
I
I
know
mean, that's what they
personally
say, right?
speaking,
Go ahead.
well, for myself, and I was talking about it earlier today. I don't have the patience. I'm just not built to be able to look up in the sky and track movements of the celestial bodies. I admire people that can do that, that have that peace of mind where they can just sit and observe. So any thoughts that I were to form about the heavens, they're going to be based on someone else's story, whatever it is. So, I mean, and I don't really have a way of knowing which one is correct. I don't think, some of them seem like they make more sense than others, but I really don't know. So that's a big fat nothing from me. I wouldn't even hazard a guess as to what could be the most accurate representation of any of that stuff.
Well, I think just carrying that thought on just a little bit more, like perhaps that's in pursuit of the question of where where we are, or where I am type of thing, and we do have these weird celestial events or these auspicious celestial events happening. In fact, we're right in the middle of it right here, right now. These eclipses and all of that stuff, and as somebody earlier mentioned, as above, so below, and we did venture up to the northern part of the Earth, so I thought maybe there was some relevance there. Um, I, uh, I haven't come to any hard and fast conclusions myself on maybe I'm in the neighborhood of what I accept to be true from a cosmological perspective, but really it's almost a fool's error, and I don't know how important it is for me to have some higher degree of certainty. So, um, at any rate, it was interesting to hear this idea of us hailing from the northern part. And with the white skin and all of that, I can tell you that being down in Mexico and having moved from the northern part of the U.S. And a relatively white skinned fella, yeah, when you move to southern Mexico, I guess speaking to the adaptability of human beings, yeah, my in 3 years, my body has adapted. It's thinner. It's hot as hell down here. I don't eat as much. My skin color is completely different than it is or was. The 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 I guess you could say the the nationals here, the Mexicans that hail from here, are much darker in the south than they are from the north. But there's a big Spanish influence, of course, that it was in part and parcel caused that. There's significant racism here, and that's not even from my own observation. This is friends of mine um, who actually came from the north of Mexico on the border and made their way down to the south 20 years ago, and yeah, they pointed out to me, and I've been witness to it. The racism, I'd say, is as pronounced down here as it is where I come from in the U.S. And so this these ideas of race and skin color, etc. I don't know in the end what the truth of the matter is or where we come from, but it's certainly a tool that's been used to divide us further and separate us further. I do know that. I see it every day down here. So.
Well, in Indio, kind of a slam, like a sort of an insult that I think that refers to people that what they say in Latin American countries, that people that have the more Indian heritage, they're darker and whatever, they're less European, I guess, maybe, for lack of a better word, and they call them Indios, and it's kind of an insult to a degree, I think.
Well, I'm not super sure on that first, but I will tell you a term that I've been made aware of recently, and it's a very real term that's used a lot, and it's kind of in the reverse, and it's called whitexicans. And that's I don't know. You can use your imagination there. Whitexicans, and so these are Mexicans who aspire to be whiter, or to be, I guess, emulating their brethren to the north of the border there, and so a lot of Mexicans point fingers at their fellows that have chosen tends to be a little bit more materialistic lifestyle centered. It's definitely it seems to be a little bit more egocentric, materialistic centric. But that's the term that was just brought to my attention a couple of months ago. But pretty interesting.
So Michael Jackson started a fad? Is that what we can get from that?
Okay, yeah, good one, Linda. Yeah, way to break the ice there.
Well, you mentioned these celestial events, and we have this big one coming up. Actually, we have friends coming to visit us here in Texas, so they can be, I guess, there's some kind of corridor where it's going to be more obvious. I mean, that totally doesn't make sense to me. If the moon is 240,000 miles away, how being in one part of the country or the other would give you a better vantage point. I guess they can account for it with curvature, maybe, I guess, would be what the answer for that. But anyway, I know that at least I don't listen to hardly any news or barely look at any alternative media or anything. So I have heard that there are some people predicting some sort of chaotic events in relation to this eclipse. Have any of you here heard anything, any speculation about what they're saying might be associated with this eclipse?
People are saying that there's going to be a solar flare at the same time as the eclipse, and it's going to cause an EMP that's going to shut down America. So beware.
The old EMP.
Yeah, I saw an article about the National Guard is being called up in a couple of states. They're closing schools as well because they're afraid of what's going to happen. I think it's like,
Yeah, but
it's like
this
Y2K.
is just
Nothing will happen.
nothing. It's going to be a nothing burger, just like everything else.
Yeah, nothing will happen. But
It's a fear
they're
tactic.
hyping it like something will happen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I've heard all kind of. I mean, not well. My wife looks at Twitter and she reads things. Somebody on there was talking about some kind of. Evidently, I think they're saying they're calling out the National Guard in places, and I don't know. I mean, they've told us here in Texas that we should prepare for like a natural disaster type of scenario. Just stock up on food, fill your tank, stay off the street, mainly because of the influx of observers, whatever tourists that want to see it, that we're going to be overrun with all these people. But then, the whole National Guard thing, and I don't know if anybody's heard anything about that sort of thing.
Oh yeah,
That's what I was just saying.
Yep.
That's real. They already are, or have already determined to call up the National Guard in certain states.
yeah, more than one state. And I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought this up, because I would like to lean on you guys' experience here, kind of being in this world a little bit longer than I. This is something that this particular topic is something that because one of the few podcasts I do listen to, they covered it at depth. I don't know if any of you guys have ever listened to Crow 777, but at any rate, he's an amateur astronomer, and he has the patience for us to go out and look at the moon and the sun every day, or he did anyway. And so I value his perspective only because he's put in the time, right? And so he raised the question of these he brought up the topic of these eclipses, and brought in a guy who evidently has a lot of pedigree when it comes to these topics, and it was quite interesting. And they were talking about the same thing that Silas was talking about, maybe a little bit different angle, but the 17 eclipse, and going through 6 or 7 towns called Salem, and it was in the arc, or the shadow of the eclipse. That ecliptic path was coming from the northwest of the United States down to the southeast. Conversely, this time, evidently, it's going from northern Mexico up through Texas and then out through Nova Scotia, creating essentially crossroads called and makes a big X, right? Well, anyway, I thought it was interesting that Silas was really covering this at length, and Crow was covering this at length, and that made sense to me, because both those two guys, both those two groups, tend to dive deep, right? Well, then I started to see the coverage on Zero Hedge, started to see the coverage on some of what I would consider tier one, kind of one step removed from the mainstream media, started covering the same thing. And then I just glancing headlines, I'm seeing that this shit's everywhere. And then again, just like you pointed out, National Guard's being called in, everybody and their brother. My daughters are in their 20s. They're telling me about this stuff, so whatever Instagram accounts that they're connected to that I'm not, it seems like the whole damn world is being spun up to participate or pay attention, or perhaps, as I think Linda maybe used the nothing burger, perhaps it's just something to occupy our attention, and or the fear porn. But it was really interesting. And it got into the level of governmental action, right? And so, calling an emergency in advance of a celestial event 1 month ahead of time is interesting to me, right? And in particular, when it happens in multiple states, in multiple counties, like, I understand that we have a centralized control mechanism going on here, and I understand that in some things it does make its way down into that level of nuance in local governments. But wow, that is a coordination. I guess COVID helped us understand that that's possible. But yeah,
Well,
anyway,
there was another story that I heard, though, that correlates with all this stuff coming out or whatever, because I can't remember the guy's name, but he was talking about the EMP turning off all computerized vehicles. So every vehicle would stop because of this solar flare that would happen at the same time as the eclipse.
just like leave the world behind. Wow, interesting. Well, one last piece of intel on that is that one of these second tier alternative channels. I mean, I don't know if it's this guy wears a cowboy hat and he's a singer and he's got 500,000 followers. I don't know what the hell that means. If it probably doesn't mean much of anything, but he supposedly there was a guy on his channel calling himself a retired Air Force general that was weighing in on this, right? And so, but they're throwing out a lot of the stops. I don't really know what to make with it. I was wondering, just you guys been around the block a long time. You've seen these build up on all these events, and they turn out in many cases to be a nothing burger. So is this just another one of the same?
Well,
I guess. And if
I'm gonna.
that's the case, why?
I'll comment on that in his regard to history in terms of what we mostly hear. A lot of these things we decided are psyops, and generally we find out after the fact that there was some governmental task force team, something doing a drill in the particular area at the same time. And they just happened to be on the scene and they were able to respond. I mean, that was the case with 9/11, with Sandy Hook. Many others I can't name. I know it's the same case in London. And so if there is going to be a PSYOP, that would be the excuse where all the National Guard and everything was in place prior, right? Because they're telling us they're going to have all these, government agencies, I guess, sort of on the scene for this. So if they do decide to pull off a PSYOP, they'll have everything in place, and that's the reason they'll give us for why they were all there. Just something to consider. I'm not making a prediction. I'm just saying we've seen that sort of thing in the past.
Well, and you'll notice the way they the way they preview it almost is, like everything's a state of emergency. Like that we should look to the government to save us from all whatever it is, the next upcoming thing. We need them to grow the government and the protective forces to save us from whatever the next thing is. So I think a lot of it is hype, and you're right. They're probably just running a drill. They're just practicing. But what? Yeah, you're right. What are they practicing for? Like, do they just want to condition us to where we're all in a constant state of emergency?
I mean, if they came out 10 minutes before the eclipse happened and said, "Oh my gosh, this solar flare just went off. Get in your houses, bunker down, lock up, lock down, put on your mask, you put the things, put towels by your doors, all this stuff." People would do it. Just saying. People would do it.
Well, unfortunately, I have to agree with you there, Linda. That seems to be the stage. Was that not shocked? Would you were talking about this perpetual state of emergency, or I think a couple of you mentioned that, and that's maybe we talked about this on the weekend too, but it's like that's got some, that's worth mentioning, because the little bit of due diligence I've done on the legal related issues in the United States and et cetera, it suggests quite a few people are making some pretty strong cases that the U.S. has been in a perpetual state of emergency since 1871, and that affords them the right to do much more than they can under what we're told is our Constitution. And so maybe that's got some legs. There always seems to be a reason to be under emergency, and there's always a lot of money involved, and there's always a lot of legal Patriot Acts and shit that emerge from these emergencies, and where they just seemingly we're being stripped down bare ass naked in terms of what we can and can't do, and so maybe that's just a. We'll see. I
Yeah,
guess
I
we'll
think
see.
I think yeah, I don't know what it would be, but it's like like the 9/11 emergency spun off into Homeland Security and the TSA. I mean, how many billions of dollars have been spent on those organizations since 2001? Like how I don't know what it would be, but what could they spend this into? Like you know some kind of homeland. I don't know the
Yeah, but if you
security, a
actually
lunar security, or I don't know, space security. I don't know. Maybe Space Force will come in and take over if the solar flares get too bad,
yeah, but
right?
if you think about what they're doing though, they're preemptively calling for a disaster, right? Like a
Oh
hurricane
yeah,
per se.
totally, yeah.
So this is different from 9/11 in 2020 because 2020 just hit and then they called it a worldwide emergency. This is preemptive. So don't know where they're going with this, but I would say
Yeah, but the
Well,
WHO had been telling us this was coming for decades, with all the other swine flu and bird flu. Like they've been prepping us for that for a while. It's just they hadn't gone global with it. It was always regional. So yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I think that's what they're prepping us for is the constant prepping. What is it? I forgot the propaganda campaign they had for the kids hiding under their desk. I know they had a turtle as the mascot. Like in the case of nuclear attack, like now it's in case of what it is. There's always some new boogeyman coming to get us.
kids are always hiding under their desk. Yes. It's insane.
Yeah, I think the school shooters may have run its course because I know my kids they just laugh at the
What-
drills they run,
Yeah, as
just like
far
we
as
did
I
with the
mean,
tornado drills.
you did mention 9/11 and the TSA and the Homeland Security. I don't know. Idea his observation about what has changed since 2020. That ushered in a new era of enquiry. I don't know. I analyze it like the way that we all do. But I don't know whether that it would. Idea.
You kind of broke up there first. Could anybody else hear? I didn't really catch what you were saying.
Yeah, he broke up for me too.
Okay.
He must be traveling.
I think what he was saying was to the effect of what's happened since 2020. Like, what have they spun that into? Like, like I brought up the TSA and Homeland Security. Like, what have they spun the money into, or the private? Where's all the money going from all the COVID money that they appropriated to save us from COVID and from the next disease X that's coming?
Yeah, but there's organizations out there like Community Action who still has money from COVID that you can go and get
Oh
your
yeah,
property
yeah,
taxes paid. Yeah. So I mean,
yeah.
the money's still flowing from COVID. It's still out there.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, what's it? Yeah, where is it going? I guess is like I always look at it as what's the next permanent agency. The Department of X, like whatever it is. Like it's we've got a Department of Agriculture, Department of Education,
Yeah, but
EPA. They all spun off from
oh, oh,
some kind of state of
yeah, but
emergency.
2020 introduced the United Nations and the WHO. So now we have the United Nations. So that's
Yeah, I
what
think
spun off
yeah,
from 2020.
I think it's prepping us to take orders from a global power versus regional. Even though a lot of people don't talk about this, but the true state of emergencies were from the states. Like our state implemented a state of emergency. We weren't under like a federal state of emergency. I don't know what that's even called, but it literally was from the states. And because I kept calling my local congressman and senator and saying, why are we still in a state of emergency? Because they're like, oh, you don't have to do this. I was like, no, that's not my question.
Yeah, but that
The
came
question is
from the WHO, the
from my
World
governor.
Health
That came
Organization.
from my governor. No, my governor
Yeah, but they
implemented it
were
in
taking.
the local
Yeah,
states.
but they were taking
But they've got no
instructions
jurisdiction
from
over
the
the state.
WHO.
But they've got no
They
jurisdiction.
don't.
Legally, the state
Well,
implemented the state of emergency
legally, we don't know
to
what
make it
legally
official.
is. I mean, you can argue the Constitution, but the Constitution wasn't written
No.
for us.
I'm
It
not
was
talking
written
about
for them.
Constitution.
So, yeah,
I'm
but
talking about the local
I'm
state,
just
the
saying
state
that
government. Yeah.
the United Nations in 2020 had the rule over the entire world.
Oh no, I agree.
There's no
Everybody
doubt
took
about it.
their advice, but they just advised this is what you should do. Nothing was enforceable, but they are looking to implement it at the federal level. That we do have to follow the WHO's orders if they do declare another pandemic. That is actually in the works.
Yeah, but I think this is what came out of that. It is like, I mean, what United Nations organization would deal with what we're about to face,
Yeah.
according to all the hype with its eclipse. You know, what organization in the United Nations takes care of that?
Oh yeah, so that's the question. Is what's going to spin off next? I think something else. They're like, oh my gosh, this is something new. We didn't even think of how to protect you from this. How can we grow bigger? We need to do this globally. This affects everyone. Yeah, I don't know. I can't even imagine, but it definitely has that feeling that something else. They're hyping it for a reason, right? And typically there's some power and control being shifted that we find out about later. And usually certain companies making a lot of money on the back end.
Hey, so guys, I had a baby crying in the background, and there was a little breakup on somebody's end there, so I wasn't quite certain if I heard right. Was there anybody that mentioned, because we were on the UN topic, or the WHO and various centralized organizations, did anybody mention the pandemic treaties that are, I mean, that's in our face everywhere? If you have to be completely unplugged not to at least recognize that they're talking about doing a pandemic treaty and a international health regulations update. Did any of you guys just mention that in your thoughts? I don't want to say something that was already said.
I didn't mention that, but I mentioned the United Nations was brought to the attention of the world in 2020.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to allude to, but I didn't know. I didn't word it as well as you did, Noble, the treaty. But yeah, I think that's where it just basically gives. It's more like you don't even have to ask permission. Then it's just the top down. They don't just give advice; they tell you this is what you're going to do. They're basically getting a step closer to a world government, which we're really pretty much in anyway. I think that's kind of evident from how
Seems like it.
Things work in the world. Yeah,
it definitely seems like it. And so I wonder, maybe this goes back to this tribe idea that we were touching on when I joined the call a little bit earlier, and would start using word like us, meaning the people on this call or people like us that are kind of tending to be a little bit more wide-eyed than others. are we like, do we have our own recency bias, do you think? Like, so for example, it's and far as like you said, I don't spend a lot of time digging into these alternative news sources either. I do cursory reviews of headlines, and occasionally if there's a topic that's really interesting to me, I'll go in a little bit deeper. But what I've come to realize is, like, from my vantage point in the sources that I look at, and I peruse the mainstream ones, I mean, just like a glance over, just to see what they're feeding us, you know? And this seems to me that this pandemic treaty slash international health regulations thing is kind of out there. You know, it's kind of like people seem to be a little bit on guard that it's out there, but maybe not. You know, maybe we're just hyper aware and we're seeing these things, and they want us meaning, I guess you could say, the whatever you would label us, but us to kind of see this thing, and maybe the rest of the world doesn't. Because if the rest of the world doesn't know what's coming, well, I mean, they're putting it right out there. I mean, they're basically, they're incentivizing, according to the, I've read some of the drafts on both the international health regulation and the pandemic treaties, and some commentaries on them, because I've been looking into this for a year or plus, because I really followed the 2020 thing through. At any rate, what they're basically doing is incentivizing countries to find reasons for the UN slash the WHO to declare a pandemic. There's economic incentives for countries to do that, and my understanding is that they're big. The negotiation or the debate that's in play right now at that centralized UN level, or their committees or whatever, is just who's going to get the most of the spoils. Essentially, they're negotiating who's going to get this emergency money. Like, and if you're not playing ball, if you don't sign up, well, you know, and if 10 South America sign up, and you're the sole bastard that chooses not to, because you just inherently think this is wrong. Well, when they do pass this thing and they do roll it out, you're not going to get any of the dough. When they have this regional, this regional, what do they call it? The event of significance or something that's called like that. Some international concern. Well,
and I have it is something to do, you know, they always have this sort of counter-official story idea. So there's anything I've read about it, I'll read like, but I want to say, it's on the table. It's supposed to be approved or something before too long, right? You know what the deadline is, or if there's one.
Yeah, it's the end of May. It's like they meet the 24th through the 28th, right around the corner.
Yeah, the only thing I've read from the authors that have, analyzed it is it's, a pretty egregious takeover of sovereignty internationally. Yeah, I don't. But then there's always
another
there's always
crossroads.
how they put that into practice too, and how feasible it is. The WEF, they have big, grand, lofty visions about how they're going to control every last detail of everyone's lives, but a lot of it, I think, is a pipe dream, even for them. Does anyone have any ideas on this Baltimore bridge? It seems like it.
No.
And
I
then we
haven't
got
looked into it much, but
that's I think P. Diddy is going to occupy a lot of people's attention for a while. They'll probably run that thing out for a while, I think. And that in the bridge and the eclipse, there's a lot of distraction that we have to look forward to probably in the next couple of months. But is that April, May? I mean, could it be just that to distract everybody from the treaty that they're going to sign? I mean, I don't know.
I think part
Throwing
of
it
it
out,
is
seeing what sticks.
to me part of it seems to me they are trying to bring out some distractions. Partly because normally in an election year, that's all everybody would be talking about. It seems like no one's talking about the election. So maybe they're just trying to just grab people's attention however they can. But
Yeah.
Speaking of the bridge, the only angle I saw on that was they were talking about the shipping port being shut down, but I don't know how much that's going to affect. All they mentioned was the auto industry that was immediately affected by it.
Yeah, there's that. And then I read something that port is one of the only places that will allow hazardous chemicals to cross from one part of the state or country to the other. And then I guess if it's depending on what the volume of shipping that goes through there, if that's shut down for a period of time, it'll affect access to those products and whatnot for part of the country. Who knows? We'll see in the coming weeks what happens, what's the result. But and I've seen one video and from some like a cell phone video or something, I don't know. And yeah, it does seem a little bit suspect to me that a cargo ship would run into one of those giant pylons or supports for the bridge. I mean, I can't picture how that could happen. The video I saw has the ship lights blinking out a couple of times, and they're saying it's power loss, which could have contributed to the trajectory being off. But I mean, from what I understand, it takes a long time to move the ship in a particular direction, or at least a little bit. They don't turn on a dime, so it would have probably had to be on a trajectory to hit the support a while before it actually did. I don't know.
This is going to be a solar flare. Trust me. That caused this whole thing. No, I'm not saying trust me. I'm just saying that makes sense that they would say that. Like, oh, we found out 2 weeks later that this was a solar flare that caused the ship to go off course and run into this bridge.
Fried the electronics. I like it.
Happened at night. It happened at night, though. So I don't know. Solar flares affect.
It doesn't matter though.
I don't think it matters. Yeah.
According to them, it doesn't matter. Yeah. It would have just been more intense.
It'll fly around the world. It'll fly around the world to the other side.
They go right through the world, apparently. Yeah.
Okay.
That'd be a good spin on it.
Well, good catch. I mean, Lynn, I've seen like 6 movies in the last 2 years, and I watched Leave the World Behind, and I don't know have you seen it? I mean, because if you haven't, the two things that you just mentioned, the electronic vehicles and boats basically going off course, were the kind of the two biggies in the beginning of the movie. I mean, literally, Obama, and Mr. and Mrs. Obama were executive producers of this thing, and I don't know, it just sounds so ridiculous.
Weren't there planes in there too? Because of,
planes as well.
That was later. Crashes. Yeah, that was later. The plane crashes. Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess again, now you're talking about the planes. It sounds like that everything that's happening is kind of a reflection, maybe in a less severe way than what was in that movie. Boats going off course, planes that have been. I'm not sure about know that. I mean, but yeah, maybe that'll be what happens next week, or whenever.
Oh no, Tesla recalled some cars, some electric cars, because they were going rampant on a self-autopilot or something. So that did happen.
Okay.
Oh well, I wanted to feel your pulse, guys, real quick. You mentioned zero hedge. I think I mentioned it too, and one of the reasons that I peruse zero hedge is it's an aggregator, so I can peruse the headlines faster. But Drudge Report is the most ridiculous comedy. Although I do peruse that too, just to see what the ding dongs are doing. But well, I happened to catch that. Oh, our friend Alex Jones was in one of the inaugural debates that Zero Hedge is playing, and I've kind of come to realize that old Tyler Durgan and Zero Hedge is, at least their anonymous articles are certainly, and probably most of them are certainly just feeding the media propaganda machine. But when these, I guess these otherwise somewhat to the unsuspecting, reputable like personalities in the case of like Russell Brand or Zero Hedge is at least for the unsuspecting, they wouldn't really pick up on the fact that it's a controlled op platform. But when you bring in Alex Jones to the party, I mean, aren't you tipping your hand? I mean, is there somebody that is more the poster child for the ultimate controlled opera? I guess maybe David Icke, but is there, the fact that they would bring him in, what tells me is that they just don't give a shit. I mean, for those of us who know that Alex Jones is a fraud and whatever, I guess they don't give a shit. What do you got to say?
In response to that, I will say that I think it sounds arrogant to say we're kind of a select group, but I don't talk to a crowd that's, most of the people I talk to have either don't know anything about the stuff we talk about here, or we're here. I don't talk to anybody that's in between that might still be a follower of Alex Jones and not know his real story. But I would say that the whole thing with I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are probably disappointed about him reversing himself on stage, but the fact that he got deplatformed might give him more street cred as real opposition. You know what I mean? In the minds of a lot of people who don't go much further than that. So there may be a lot of people out there that still look at Alex Jones as sort of a resistant figure.
Yeah, but if he's going on these other channels, I think they're just trying to manipulate the masses again into different cages, right? So where are they going to go after, if they already know Alex Jones is controlled op and he's on Zero Hedge, and they thought Zero Hedge was to be trusted, and now they got a crossroads. So where are they going to go after that? That's where I think they're just playing us on a game board. Where are we going to go after we realize somebody else is bullshit?
There's not many places to go, Linda. Man, I tell you, every single.
No, there's not. That's what I'm saying. There's not many places to go. So where are they leading the masses at this point? Which the masses probably don't listen to Zero Hedge either. Just to be honest.
True.
No,
True.
they don't. They don't. And I'm going to say
way.
right now, Zero Hedge focuses largely on economics. There's all kinds of stuff about the stock market and money supply, this and that. And have anyone here ever heard of the economic issue they call the free rider problem?
No, and I follow the economics. No, I've never heard of.
Well, that I think, once upon a time, the free rider problem might have been sort of an excuse to have government to be a deterrent against shoplifting. Or I think it was related to people that would hop on a bus and steal rides on the bus without paying their token or whatever. But I think the economic school of thought today is that the free market has solved the free rider problem by building it into their business model that there's going to be X percentage of shrinkage, whether it's from breakage or theft or shoplifting, and they adjust their profit and loss calculations accordingly, and they just let it ride. Don't worry about it. It's part of the equation. And so, in regards to us, I think that places like this we may be the free riders on the people that run these psyops. They just let us go. We're not big enough to have any real impact, and they don't really care too much about us. But like the Zero Hedge and Alex Jones group, they might be close enough related, and there might be enough with them where they care about psyoping them still,
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, I think they had someone called them geniuses earlier. I'm not sure if I guess I understand there's some genius to this psychopaths nonetheless, but yeah, certainly they recognize that there's going to be a few sleuths out there that are going to see through the mirage it does seem that our numbers are low enough to where it's nowhere near critical mass. So that makes sense to me, Farce.
Yeah, but I mean, if you actually think about it, like all the so-called book writers back in the day, right? Like the Manly P. Halls and the whatever. You can name a bunch. I think they're just hurting people. And nobody writes books. Well, I mean, there's a few people that still write books, but who reads them? Because it's all here. You see what I mean? Deep discussion. They've changed the mindset of people to communicate and not. Which, I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. So.
And I've mentioned it several times, and I keep quoting this guy Osho because I just see so much in the things he says and writes that relate. But I think it's way deeper than just like political media, and he's not a fan of what he refers to as the mind anyway. His one of the quotes is that he said, "Your mind is not your own; it was given to you." And he talks about mysteries, like we were talking about the universe and celestial bodies, and he's like, the mind makes questions and questions that can't be answered. It creates rabbit holes for you. Like if you can just embrace the mystery and say, "I don't know," it's marvelous, it's awe inspiring, and I'm just going to accept it and realize I don't know. You say, "I don't know," and then on the other hand, when you know something, that's beyond mind. Like you know it. You don't have to ask. You don't have to question. You don't have to rationalize and support it with fact. You know it. It's an experience, And that's my own quote, and I don't know if I made this up, but I've said nobody ever learns to swim by reading a book. Like once you know how to swim, you don't have to read, and no matter how much reading you do about it, you're never going to learn how to swim until you're in the water. So that's the thing about all these sites, like Linda was saying, it's just more rabbit trails, more things to keep the mind engaged, more questions for the mind that aren't going to have any answers. basically it just keeps us all from knowing anything. Well, that's Crow's tagline too, right? Belief is the enemy of knowing. So, that's probably a huge part of this equation, is just the amount of distraction that everyone is engaged in all the time.
And I'm not saying that this conversation is a distraction or whatever. I'm just saying that like minds heard together, I think it's a natural thing. You know what I mean? There's not anything wrong with it. But eventually, if the minds don't mesh, you're going to go somewhere else and find minds that do. That's what I was leading to.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's. I think in my experience, it's pretty rare when I run across somebody that's kind of like okay with not knowing, or if they hear something that makes them uncomfortable, they have a reaction that's like, "Oh, I haven't ever thought that way before. Tell me more." Or, "What makes you say that?" They have this resistance, like, "Oh, that's crazy," or, "Oh, you're evil," or, "Oh," because they don't like the discomfort of those contradictory thoughts. And that could be a
Right.
reason why a lot of people group together that think similarly, because they don't have to experience that discomfort.
Well, I mean, why would you want to just to experience that discomfort all the time? Because I mean, just look at nature. It's like if one of the pack or whatever is disobedient and is going to be harm to the rest of the pack, they either kick it out or kill it. That's fact. They're not putting up with that shit. Humans don't do
But
that.
we're talking about now about whether dissident thoughts cause harm, because that's really what we're talking about here, right? I mean,
Right,
if you
right.
have some crazy person that's stabbing people in the tribe, obviously you don't want to have that. But
Right, but
do they?
yeah, we're talking about thought. And if somebody's interrupting the flow of thought and not open-minded in a group of people that are open-minded and can listen to all this stuff, they're kind of an outcast, right? I mean, we kind of put them in that box, right? Because we're not going to tolerate them for very long, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know that I've ever suggested. Well, I might have suggested Boogeyman be ejected once upon a time, but I generally have a pretty high tolerance for it being able to listen to a contradictory idea, that what I might
No,
have an
I'm
argument
with
against it
you.
and
But
argue
but
emphatically against it, but I can listen to it.
right, but this server here has kind of even become smaller and ruled out those kind of people, right? So when somebody comes to this server and they're not open to anything, then they will be an outcast. I'm just saying. Yeah, you can go to FACO and listen to all kinds of people because that's what FACO is, and we accept that for what it is. I'm okay with that. But when you're in a different server that's not about that, then it kind of interrupts the flow. You see what I mean?
Or I would imagine. Well, what I think what it is probably more. I'm guessing now, thinking about what we might do, because like for the person that has the cognitive dissonance, that's hearing things that contradict ideas that they might be emotionally invested in, that's uncomfortable. So they might have an emotional response to that. And then that emotional response is projected out onto the other people in the conversation. And so, like, everybody feels a little bit of that discomfort, you know? Like,
Right.
whereas if you're really open-minded and you're comfortable with saying, well, I don't know, or, you know, that's a mystery and I accept it as a mystery, or, you know, whatever, and I'll hear your idea, but I don't have to embrace it or, you know, reject it, either one. I can just hear it. I mean, then you're not really going to be uncomfortable by hearing other people's things. But if you're
Right.
not built that way, then you'll be uncomfortable.
Right. But there's also people that, you know, come in, servers and things like that, that are so rejecting of it that they counteract it constantly. And it's just like, you're going to find a server where you can just openly talk to where that doesn't exist. But yeah, you can go on other servers where it exists and you're okay with it because you accept it, because that's how life is, right? That's kind of where I was going with that.
And I'm sort of the opinion too that I feel like the PSYOP managers inject bots or trolls into forum to disrupt them, and you know, whatever. I don't know there's any forums out there changing the world necessarily, but it does seem like, from what I've seen, that belief is a big pillar that holds up the system. So I do think they're
Yep.
concerned about what people believe, and they want them to believe certain things. So
No, I think you're
I mean,
right about that. Yep.
Yeah, no question.
so I can,
Sorry, guys.
yeah.
I
Go ahead.
I was just going to
Just ramble.
apologize for being silent there. I've got a lot of background noise, so I didn't want to subject you guys to the crying baby. So I'm still with you, but I'm going to be in and out. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, kind of related, but not necessarily on the subject. And it's more Ocho stuff. I'm just getting a whole lot out of this guy, but you know, who knows? I may come to realize that that's all crap too. But you know, he talks about being comfortable with uncertainty and change. And he's like, if you're looking for something that doesn't change, you're going to look at something that's dead. Because to be alive is to be experiencing change, like, all the time. And I know a lot of people are very sort of averse to change. They don't like it. I'm kind of that same way too. I like the idea of everything being kind of predictable and having a degree of certainty in my life, and so that the idea of just embracing uncertainty and nothing's going to be static, everything's dynamic, everything's a mystery, and just, you know. But I mean, the way he describes it, that's what it is to really live in the moment, not worried about what's going to happen
Right.
tomorrow. And so I respect
I would
it,
agree
and
with that. I've never
I
read
like
him,
the
but
idea.
I would
Yeah, yeah.
would agree with that. Because I mean, like, life, right? You can be driving to work every day and for a whole week experience this almost the same thing, right? And then
Mm.
one day this car just comes out of the blue and it's just a fucking idiot, right? That's the change. You either deal with it or road rage, whatever you decide to do, but that's the change. And people experience that kind of stuff every day. And I just go with the flow. If that car wants to be an idiot and cause a wreck or whatever it does, so be it. I'm not involved. Just let it go.
I mean, and
Really,
well, go ahead. You probably have something there.
no, I'll bring up the rear.
I was going to say a lot of this, like the fear porn stuff that's pumped out 24/7. You know, that's all, and maybe that too could be a little bit on the other side of what the, you know, the government promises you. We'll keep it. We'll control everything. We'll keep everything. We'll maintain the status quo. We'll make sure that there's a chicken in every pot, and you know, whatever. And you'll be protected. You'll be safe. You'll be secure. You can be assured that things aren't going to change. And there's that promise. And on the other side, they're like, oh, you know, inflation is going to wreck your savings, and the Russians are coming, and there's a new virus around the corner, and the World Health Organization is doing this and that. There will be marshals. Go on, you know, how long is that list? It's huge. So that, you know, that sort of keeps you in this state of always like, oh, I want everything to be the same, and they say it could be the same, but it's going to change, and I'm worried what the change is going to be. Yeah, that's not a good way to live, really.
Well, let me comment on that. Actually, just this topic's really interesting to me. It's something that actually Critical and I were discussing the other day, and it's this: you can't win if you don't play. You know, it's kind of like, ironically, that
Yes,
war
I missed
game. You can't win if you don't play.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, the war games, you know, the war games famous line at the end of the movie is the only way to win the game is not to play, right?
Right.
And so,
Mhm.
but ducking into the Osho, so wow, Farce. I mean, that he's a heavy hitter. You know, I have some friends that hung out with the man. I mean,
Oh, really? Wow.
oh yeah. Okay, so Osho's he's kind of made a name for himself, and I have you watched the series about him? I don't remember which streaming service or pay-per-view it came out, maybe a decade ago, or it's if you're really interested in that guy, I didn't watch it myself, but I happen to know a bit about him because I'm always looking for the dissonant thought. You know, I'm always looking for the sage out there that is saying something a little bit different than what they're saying in the status quo, or in the just trying to follow the breadcrumbs to the truth type of thing. And yeah, he's a fascinating human. And so
Yeah,
the conversation that go ahead.
go ahead. No, I want to hear. No, I just want to anything you have as far as any sort of personal stories or whatever you've heard. Just real. I'll fill in real quick. I had some book that I downloaded a long time ago called The Book of Secrets. I had never looked at, had it on PDF, and I just randomly opened it a couple of weeks ago and started reading it. I'd never heard of the guy. I might have seen a quote here or there, and then I just got so fascinated with the stuff that was in here. And this Book of Secrets is about 112 ways to meditate, and he sort of says that if you go until you find the right one that works for you, and it's probably in there, and you'll have this enlightening experience once you get underneath all of the programming, your mind, and blah blah. But then there's so many quotes like what I'm talking about that are in there, and I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating information. And I got another book by him, which about fear, which is really interesting. And then Armin Rai told me that he had made the news like in the 70s or 80s, I don't know, back when, about having some sort of cult in the U.S. and being accused of running drugs and having a sex, all this stuff you hear about any of these cults. And so I was like, oh, that would make sense. Here I find this charismatic leader, and of course he's going to be this cult figure. But at the same time, I could also see how that could have just been a hit piece, a media campaign to demonize the guy, because just reading his material, knowing nothing about him, I found it to be really resonant with me and to make a lot of sense. So that's my story about him.
Well, so it's really relevant to this idea of we could get hit by the milk truck tomorrow, right? It's not he. So he
we can.
or the renegade tugboat. We could get hit by the tugboat tomorrow, right? Or whatever that container that just hit the bridge. But yeah, so of course he's been typecast as controversial by. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I just got some background noise there. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't
Yeah,
stepping
I'm in
on
a noisy
somebody.
environment too.
Okay. So like the ascetic lifestyle, and Armin's probably got some really good perspective on this because I think he shared this in a large group the other day that he was heading down the monastic path there for a while in his life, right? And what does that mean? The monk that approach is the ascetic path, right? It's where you renounce um, the world, the pleasures of the world, or I mean, basically, you pledge obedience, poverty, celibacy. There's I'm not suggesting that it's not a viable route to get to the end of the game or whatever that is, but that is in stark contrast to its opposite, which would be the tantric path, which is where you fully embrace life, where you take these teachings and the whole practice is to take them into your day to day. It's like to be a monk but in the world and still have sex, basically, right? And so I happen to have well, let's just say I feel qualified to speak on these matters. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But Osho and Yogi Bhajan and Muji and countless others, some of which be like Sadhguru, for example. My sense is that guy's a made man. He's inside baseball, right? He's got 11 million followers, and he's
Yoga,
hugging on
the guy that Jeff Berwick talks about all the time.
Sadhguru. Is that him? I'm not sure.
Well, he calls him Sat Yoga. Shrew Murphy or whatever. I don't know. That's Jeff Berwick plugs him all the time.
Okay.
If it's the same guy.
I'm not sure exactly who he's referring to. And the Sat Yoga, that could be a different person, but at any rate, I was basically putting a disclaimer out there is that there's definitely there's a degree of controlled opposition that is playing in this spiritual guru space. There's no question. That said,
sure.
More times than not, is these individuals are very charismatic. They bring in the truthful teachings, or at least that's been there's an authenticity. I've been to India 10 times, so I mean I kind of know I know what I'm talking about from experience. I wasn't going to listen to anybody's bullshit or well, I shouldn't say bullshit. On this particular matter, when we're talking about one's spirituality, namely mine, I wasn't willing to take hearsay or somebody else's perspective, and I got trapped in the evangelical Christian box for a long time, and I learned my lessons. And so I needed to go find out some of these things. And I haven't spent a tremendous amount of time with Osho specifically, I know people that have, and I know that that the energies, the sexual energy, for example, using what most people associate with the tantric occulted knowledge is sexual in nature, and you're like, okay, well, all right, big deal. But really, if you think about it, if you look at it through the lens of nature or basically the holy trinity, if you will, or the hermetic principles, and you have the masculine and the feminine. So you have the masculine going into the feminine, and it makes the third thing, right? The sexual act is what propagates life, at least in the natural world. They're trying to change that, I think, in the not natural world, in the synthetic world. But at the end of the day, the Tantra teaches, the true teachers, they teach the aspirant or the practitioners essentially how to retain sexual energy and use it for a higher purpose, actually. And it's quite that is really the opposite of the West, of what the West teaches us, right? The West teaches young men, for example, to masturbate to any porn that they wish. I mean, they have access to anything that they want anytime, and therefore young men are just basically spewing their life force all over the laptop. Excuse the graphic nature of that comment. But essentially what they're doing is they're giving away their vitality, their life force. I mean, literally. And so the tantric practitioner, which not a lot of people know this, it's about countenance. It's literally about retention. The objective isn't the orgasm or the ejaculation. Actually, the objective is just to retain that energy, which anybody, if you've ever met anybody who's a practitioner, you'll know because you'll see the light in their eyes, you'll see the tightness of their skin, you'll see the vitality in their step and in their, it's really interesting. At any rate, I think that they demonized him because he was basically sharing occulted practices that they don't want us to know. They don't want us to retain our life force. They don't want us to know who we are at all. And because if we retain our life force and we know who we are, we're much more apt to cause a ruckus, And anyway, yeah, my a couple friend of mine, and I spent some time in Colorado, and the female of the couple spent time with Osho, and it was very sexual centric, which that's the nature. That's a primary teaching of the tantric, occult science, if you will. But it goes well beyond that. It goes well beyond sex, and it's back to kind of what Linda said. It's about living. It's about learning how to. Okay, if you're going to learn Zen Buddhism, for example, okay, well, when you go into traffic, for example, and someone's having a bad day, and how is it that you respond to a stimulus in your external environment? What do you overreact? Do you pull out your gun? Do you flip them off? Well, if you're a Zen practitioner, what you're supposed to do is accept it. And yeah, and sometimes that's very difficult to do. So anyway, I think you hooked into a live one there, Farce. And if you're interested in him, then I could turn you on to a dozen more that would.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you, and especially about you going to India. I need to book an online one-on-one with you, I think, because I got a bunch of questions, and you sound like you really, have invested some time into looking into these sorts of things, and yeah, I find it very interesting. So yeah, that's awesome, man. Just real quick about India, have you ever heard of this book called Shantaram?
Yes.
That's kind of interesting for this call, since we have all these Australians here, and the character starts out in Australia and winds up in India for a period of time. And I don't know if you've read it or if you know about it, but it's really long. But it's a lot of detail about his experience while he was in India, and he didn't go first class. He kind of ended up in whatever they call the barrio, and I can't remember the name for that, the ghetto or whatever. But yeah, it was super, super interesting, and I would love to know if that the way he represented it is similar to what you experienced when you were there. But you'd have to read it, I think.
I've been suggested that I read that book by, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 different people now, and so okay. Now this is just tipped me over. I'm gonna.
Yeah, I have it on. I have it on audiobook, and I don't know if I have it in any kind of electronic format, but I'll be happy to send you a link to it if you want it.
Oh yeah, please, please, please. Yeah, and be happy to farce to. In fact, I think the first time that I got on a call with you, believe it or not, I was in India. The
Oh
first
wow.
time that that me and you and someone else were on a call talking about something, I don't know what, but yeah, I'd be happy to answer any, yeah, whatever I can do to help. I'd love to. Actually, that's the top. This is the area. Well, I'm just like you guys. I mean, I think most of us are really just trying to get to just trying to figure this shit out. And I actually just as an anecdote, I didn't go to India the first time for the spiritual pursuit or the truth. In fact, I went to southern India, to Bangalore, because it was set up as the Silicon Valley of the East. I went there for business in 2009 is when I started going. But what happened is stranger in a strange land. I mean, when you go to India, you can't help but it's just very difficult to describe how different everything is. Although I just got back from there this summer, and unfortunately, it's being homogenized. It's being internized a big time, and that's a sad state of affairs. So if you ever have the opportunity, or if you've ever decided, is that the place you want to go, I'd try to get there as soon as you can, because they're trying to turn it into Disneyland. So
Yeah, it's funny because I remember talking to my parents way back in 1980 or something, which now we're 45 years ago, when at the time they were putting up these malls and then have I think an Old Navy and a Bed Bath and Beyond and a Target, and I don't know if even Starbucks around then. 4 or 5 chain stores in these malls, and like you would just see them in every city you went to. And I thought, yeah, they're trying to do this to the whole world. They want the world to look like, whatever this homogenized strip mall. And yeah, so and I think my prediction was absolutely on target way back then. So it's taken a while to get everywhere, but yeah, thanks for the tip, because I don't know. I think I just might be overwhelmed. It's just there's so much there. I wouldn't even know where to start.
But still,
well,
don't you think
yeah.
it comes back to each his own? Like, whatever this place is, nobody, I mean, the whole majority of people are never going to think alike, right?
They're never going to what?
They're never going to think alike in spirituality or anything. We just intermingle sometimes with the same thoughts.
Yeah, man. Just read something on that a couple of days. No, well, it's funny you say that. I'm reading a book by another one of these guys right now. His name is Ramana Maharshi, or Maharshi, and he's an Osho type. His shtick is self-inquiry, actually, or Jnana yoga, and he more or less said the same thing. Is like we have infinite number of personal experiences that brought us into where we are right here, right now. And it's just there's some open similarities between us, or there's a sympathetic resonance going on between us right now, or else we wouldn't be on this call. In other words, there's some kind of energetic, at the abstract, there's an energetic thing going on here. But to your point is we've all had unique experiences, so therefore we're a unique expression of the one thing that's going on. And according to Harman the other day, his theory is that we're supposed to upload that to the place where we came from, because that's the reason why God divided himself, wide himself, like Silas says, in the first place, right? It's so he is everything, and he wanted okay, that's it. I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent here, but at any rate, I'm agreeing with you is that we have an infinite difference in experience, and therefore,
Right.
yeah, yes.
And funnily enough, I don't read any of these books. I figured this out for myself. I mean, my thoughts are my thoughts. I don't read books. And Fars can verify that. Because he's known me for I don't know how long now. But I don't read these things. I look at nature and the creation itself to give me the answers. If that makes sense.
Well, that's what that I couldn't agree with you more, and that's what Crow would say. He said, "Go step out in a field and look at nature," right? And right, I mean, that's basically he says, "Hey, if you want to know what the hell's going on here, just go spend 3 months going to the same field, so that you can basically see what unfolds, and then you can relate that to your own life." Because I don't remember who said it earlier, but he's basically suggesting that we are animals, right? We're just animals with a consciousness, and so yeah, no, we can get to these understandings in a myriad of different ways. And I know you're a Manly P. Hall, and he's sounds like if you're not a reader, then you must be watching his videos or his something.
Yeah, I don't read his stuff or whatever, but I mean, he just the reason I listen to him is because he brings in some of the things that they are trying to do to us also, right? You have to listen between the lines of Manly P. Hall. Because he promoted space. He's promoted certain things. So you have to listen to him, and that's kind of why I do it. But also he throws in how you can avoid all that stuff. So it's fascinating.
I love him. I love him. I mean, the Secret Teachings, that book it's amazing. And so in my quest, which is really it's been my, other than feeding my kids and putting, it's been my thing for a long time here to figure out what's going on, and doing a tour of duty with Western esotericism was part of it. Western yoga, they call it. It's a lot of similarities to what we were just talking about. It's packaged a lot different. And Manly P. Hall was a made man, right? Was he 32 or 33 degree Mason? And so this guy he knows what the hell's going on, and the fact that he, I thank you for bringing that up. That he promoted space, because I was gonna pass on this, but no, I'm gonna go here because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about, and how it's important for us to have discernment when we're reading through these guys, or watching their videos or whatever, because there's so many kernels of truth in there, because there has to be, or we just sniff it out. They give us a lot of the truth, and then oftentimes they'll promote the big lies, right? And so I'm a big fan of Michael Singer, because the reason I'm a big fan of him is he helped me cut my teeth on some important ideas that I'm accepting as important today. And if you don't know him, he wrote the book called Untethered Soul, The Surrender Experiment, and a book called Living Untethered. And okay, so this guy, man, it's amazing the shit that he condensed down into 3 relatively small books, and it's very lined up with a lot of what I guess I've come to think is as close to the truth as I know at this point. At any rate, well, he was promoted by Oprah Winfrey, right? Like a lot of these quote unquote new agers, or a lot of so he was promoted by Oprah Winfrey, and this book that Living Untethered, I've been listening to it as I'm walking around in the mountains here, walking my dog, and it's so in line with some of the teachings from Osho and some of the teachings from Ramana Maharshi and all of these guys. It's just lined up beautifully. But you wouldn't believe how many times he talks about outer space, and the sun being 93 million miles away from here, and Mars. And it's almost like they came in and they added that shit as an afterthought. And so we got to eat the meat and spit out the bones, man.
I'm gonna maybe be, I don't know if devil's advocate is the appropriate word or appropriate phrase, but because Osho does the same thing. He references space. I mean, he doesn't dwell on it and necessarily promote it, but he might use, the moon, the NASA or something, Apollo landing on the moon is an example for something, And I wonder if, he's doing his thing and this comes across the TV and they say somebody landed on the moon. And if he's like, oh, I guess that happened, it's on the news, and he never looked into fake news or anything before and just accepts the narrative because he just doesn't really know any better about that. In spite of all the stuff he knows about it, all kind of other things, maybe he just never looked into the news being fake, or certain parts of it. I mean, he definitely doesn't have a lot of much positive to say about religion and laws and all kind of other stuff. But, maybe some of these guys just overlook that stuff and they never bother to think about whether these events are real or not. I would give him the benefit of a doubt in that regard because, like, of all the stuff that I've read and listened to so far, like, he might have brought out the moonwalk as an example for, in one of his talks or something briefly, and it's not like he's banging that drum per se, you know what I mean? So,
Amen, brother. I'm gonna take your suggestion on that because I like some of these guys. Like Eckhart Tolle was also highly promoted by Oprah Winfrey, for example. And I think you're onto something. Really, it's these guys devote their lives to not media deconstruction. They devote their lives to other things. So it's very well could be that they're just passing on what they were taught, just like everybody else.
And and personally, I kind of I've always sort of been going down this path in some rambling, not very direct way, but in my professional life, I do production for live events, mostly corporate events, and we have these different keynote speakers. A lot of times they'll be making a media circuit. They'll have a book, and these corporations will hire motivational speakers. And I heard this guy named Hal Elrod, and he has this book called The Miracle Morning. And he got in this really debilitating car accident when he was like 20 and had his head split open and broke almost every bone in his body. They told him he'd never walk again and all this stuff. Now, if anything he was saying is true in his talk, he was already kind of in a very advanced way of thinking during his recovery. He was like, well, if I end up in a wheelchair, I'm going to be the happiest wheelchair guy ever. And he said the doctor called his parents and said, there might be something wrong with your son because he's not accepting this with the level of gravitas. He's just way too unperturbed, That may or may not be true, but he said he kind of went on a quest to find, like, similar to what we're doing, and he came up with 6 things that he does every morning as a ritual. And it's like, meditation, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and journaling. And like all of those things, I don't see a problem with any of those things. So I said, well, I'm just gonna do this and see if it, see how I feel for a while. I'm just gonna follow it, like I don't know anything, and somebody told me to do this, I'm gonna do it. And that, when I came to the reading part, I just clicked on the Osho book and I started reading that, and I'm like, holy cow, there's really something here. And then I listened to this guy's second book, and it's all about like sales and putting yourself in. Like, I just became completely uninterested by that. I'm not really all that interested in having a whatever multi-level or being the best salesman of the month or seeing the graph that goes up to the right and all that kind of stuff. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with it, but I don't find it compelling. There's other things I would rather do. So I just said that to say people can probably have kernels of wisdom that might work in some areas, and they might have another part of them that doesn't resonate with you at all. And you just like, okay, I just moved on, I mean, and I may come back to it later and decide that I do want to sell something that it'll work. But yeah, it's hard to, I guess we can't be expected to resonate with every single thing anybody's going to say, but I don't think the fact that he has another side of him that I don't really resonate with makes him a shill or controlled opposition or anything like that. And he seemed pretty genuine when I met him in person. So, but he's just more into that sort of kind of mainstream type thing. And I guess that's fine too. I don't see anything wrong with wanting to have a good job and live in a nice house and have some security, even though that we never really have true security because we're alive. So there's that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No. And that's a consistent idea across a lot of these stages, at least that I've run across. And that's what we're doing. I think that's what we're quite gifted at. The group of here that's seeing patterns and seeing consistencies across these different, in this case, teachers that we can maybe, despite if I heard you, despite the fact that we may not agree with everything, there just seems to be some authenticity there that we can suss out, and also some consistency across a number of different humans. And I tell you, what a journey, what a pursuit, and the one of the things I was talking with Critical the other day about is this part of my journey. When I say this part is maybe trying to identify what I call the problem. Just everything that we, all these topics we cover that it kind of pointing to, and I just call it the problem. And this kind of coming to the realization that much of what I was taught or we were taught when we were youngsters by our parents or by our school teachers or whatever isn't true, or it isn't wholly true as it was expressed to us. And I no longer find fault in that, and a lot of these unsuspecting souls, right? But at any rate, it's given me a bit of skepticism, and so now, dare I say, for a while there, I'm a damn auto hoaxer, right? And maybe I'm a skeptic, and so I brought that skepticism into this realm of spiritual teachings. And I'll give you an example. There's a really, really famous spiritual teacher called Yogananda. He wrote a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi. It's one of the most powerful books I've ever read. I've been through it twice, and it's a tome. It's a deep one, and it's all about self-realization and all this stuff. Well, anyway, it happened to be Steve Jobs' favorite book, and there's some interesting things as well, and how it's interesting how he came to the U.S. in the 40s, and he kind of brought these ideas, and so anyway, my alarm bells went off, right? My skepticism really went off. And even though this has been a very meaningful book to me, and I think there's a lot of truth in it, he was rubbing elbows with the big names of his time. He took a chapter about Gandhi, chapter about a number of these old sages and whatnot. And I just, that struck me as, whereas most people would say, you know what, that's cool. He's rubbing elbows with Gandhi. He must be a badass. It was the opposite for me. So anyway, That's one of the downsides of knowing all this shit, which I think is where the conversation was going right when I jumped in about 4 hours ago or whatever, that you guys were talking about is the
I could I'll just shorten the whole conversation to you're trying to find the problem within yourself to find the profit within yourself.